Hidden in plain sight lies one of history's greatest untold stories. An empire that gave us our legal system, preserved classical knowledge through the Middle Ages, and created art so beautiful it still takes your breath away. The Byzantine Empire ruled for 1,123 years, longer than any other empire in history, yet somehow became history's best-kept secret. Tonight we journey through over a millennium of fascinating history, from the founding of Constantinople to the final siege that ended an empire. This is the story of Byzantium, a civilization that bridged East and West, ancient and modern, pagan and Christian. Close your eyes and let us travel back in time to discover how Rome never truly fell. It simply transformed into something extraordinary. The foundation of Constantinople. Our story begins in the year 330 AD, with a decision that would echo through centuries. Emperor Constantine the Great stood at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, looking across the Bosphorus Strait at a small Greek city called Byzantium. This ancient settlement had existed for nearly 1,000 years, but Constantine saw something far grander in its future. The Roman Empire had grown too vast to govern from a single city. Rome itself had become vulnerable to barbarian attacks from the north. Constantine needed a new capital, one that could command both the land routes from Europe to Asia and the sea lanes connecting the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. Byzantium occupied perhaps the most strategic location in the ancient world. Constantine began construction of his new capital in 3024 AD. He envisioned not just a city, but a new Rome that would rival the old capital in splendor and importance. The emperor brought the finest architects, artists, and craftsmen from across the empire. They worked for 6 years, transforming the modest Greek city into an imperial metropolis. The new city featured all the hallmarks of Roman urban planning. Wide boulevards connected major monuments. Public baths, forums, and theaters provided spaces for civic life. A massive hippodrome could seat 100,000 spectators for chariot races. The great palace complex sprawled across several acres, rivaling any structure in old Rome. But this was not merely another Roman city. Constantine made one revolutionary change that would define the empire's future. Unlike Rome, with its ancient pagan traditions, this new capital would be explicitly Christian. The emperor had converted to Christianity years earlier, becoming the first Christian Roman emperor. His new city would reflect this faith. Churches rose alongside traditional Roman buildings. The first Hagia Sophia, though much smaller than the later structure we know today, dominated the city's skyline. Christian symbols appeared on coins and monuments. For the first time, the Roman Empire had a capital designed from the ground up as a Christian city. On May 11, 330 AD, Constantine formally dedicated his new capital. He named it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. The ceremony blended Christian and Roman traditions. Bishops blessed the city, while senators performed ancient rituals. This mixture of old and new would characterize the empire for centuries to come. The location proved as strategic as Constantine had hoped. Constantinople controlled the only water route between Europe and Asia. Ships carrying grain from Egypt, silk from China, and furs from Russia all passed through its harbors. The city quickly became one of the world's great commercial centers. More importantly, the new capital was nearly impregnable. Water protected it on 3 sides. The Golden Horn, a natural harbor, provided safe anchorage for fleets. Only a narrow strip of land connected the city to the European mainland, making it easy to defend against land attacks. Within decades, Constantinople had grown into one of the world's largest cities. Merchants, scholars, and craftsmen flocked to the new capital. The emperor's court attracted diplomats from kingdoms stretching from Britain to India. What had been a modest Greek town became the beating heart of a new kind of empire. The division of the Roman Empire. The transformation of the Roman Empire into what we now call the Byzantine Empire was not a sudden event. It unfolded gradually over the 4th and 5th centuries as the vast Roman territories became increasingly difficult to govern as a single unit. The roots of division traced back to the crisis of the 3rd century. During that chaotic period, The empire had nearly collapsed under the weight of civil wars, barbarian invasions, and economic collapse. Emperors came and went with alarming frequency. At one point, more than 50 men claimed the title of emperor in a single century. Emperor Diocletian had attempted to solve this crisis through the Tetrarchy, a system of 4 rulers sharing power over different regions. Though this system eventually failed, it established an important precedent. The empire was simply too large for one man to rule effectively. Constantine reunified the empire under his sole rule, but the underlying problems remained. The western provinces faced constant pressure from Germanic tribes. The eastern provinces dealt with threats from Persia, and later the Arab caliphates. These different challenges required different military and administrative approaches. After Constantine's death in 337 AD, his 3 sons divided the empire among themselves. This partition was supposed to be temporary, but it established a pattern. For the next century and a half, the empire would be unified only briefly under exceptional rulers like Julian the Apostate and Theodosius I. The permanent division came in 395 AD when Emperor Theodosius I died. He had been the last ruler to control both eastern and western halves of the empire. In his will, he divided the territories between his 2 young sons. Arcadius received the eastern provinces with Constantinople as his capital. Honorius inherited the west with its capital at Ravenna. This division was meant to be administrative, not political. Both halves remained part of a single Roman Empire. The eastern and western emperors were supposed to cooperate as co-rulers. In practice, however, the 2 halves quickly began developing separate identities and interests. The Western Empire faced immediate challenges. Germanic tribes pressed against the Rhine and Danube frontiers. The Visigoth leader Alaric sacked Rome itself in 410 AD. The Vandal kingdom in North Africa cut off crucial grain supplies. One by one, the western provinces slipped from imperial control. The Eastern Empire, by contrast, proved more stable. Its capital was better protected by geography. Its provinces were wealthier and more urbanized. The Eastern Emperor commanded larger armies and fuller treasuries. While the West struggled against barbarian invasions, the East actually expanded its territory through successful wars against Persia. The growing divergence became clear in language and culture. Latin remained the official language of both halves, but Greek dominated daily life in the eastern provinces. Eastern armies recruited primarily from Asia Minor and the Balkans rather than Germanic tribes. Eastern Christianity developed theological traditions distinct from Roman practices. By the 5th century, the 2 empires rarely cooperated effectively. They competed for control of Illyria and the Balkans. They supported different claimants in each other's civil wars. When the Vandals captured Roman North Africa, the Eastern Emperor provided little assistance to his Western colleague. The final blow came in 476 AD, when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus, the last Western emperor. Rather than appointing a replacement, Odoacer returned the Western imperial regalia to Constantinople. Officially, this restored imperial unity under the Eastern Emperor. In reality, it marked the end of the Western Empire. The Eastern Emperor Zeno accepted the theoretical reunification, but made no serious attempt to reconquer the lost Western territories. The Eastern Empire would continue calling itself Roman, but it was now something new, a predominantly Greek, Christian, and Asian power that we call the Byzantine Empire. This transformation was gradual and complex. There was no single moment when the Roman Empire became the Byzantine Empire. Modern historians typically date the transition to Constantine's foundation of Constantinople, Theodosius's division of the empire, or the fall of Rome in 476 AD. Early Byzantine Christianity. Christianity transformed from a persecuted minority religion to the dominant faith of the Byzantine Empire in just 2 centuries. This remarkable evolution shaped every aspect of Byzantine culture, law, politics, and daily life. The transformation began with Constantine's conversion in the early 4th century. Before Constantine, Christians had faced periodic persecution under previous emperors. The Great Persecution under Diocletian from 303 to 311 AD was particularly severe. Churches were destroyed, scriptures burned, and many Christians tortured or executed. Constantine's victory at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 3112 AD changed everything. According to Christian sources, the emperor saw a vision of the cross before the battle and heard the words, "In this sign you will conquer." Whether or not the vision actually occurred, Constantine credited his victory to the Christian God. The Edict of Milan in 313 AD granted religious tolerance throughout the empire. Christians could worship openly without fear of persecution. Constantine began favoring Christianity, donating imperial funds to build churches and granting privileges to Christian clergy. By the time he founded Constantinople, Christianity had become the emperor's preferred religion. But early Christian unity was more fragile than it appeared. The new religion faced numerous theological disputes that threatened to tear it apart. Different Christian communities held conflicting beliefs about fundamental questions. Was Jesus truly divine, truly human, or both? How should Christians understand the relationship between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? The most serious early controversy was Arianism, named after the priest Arius of Alexandria. Arians believed that Jesus, while divine, was subordinate to God the Father. This teaching spread rapidly through the eastern provinces, dividing Christian communities and even the imperial court. Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD to resolve the dispute. Bishops from across the empire gathered in the city of Nicaea near Constantinople. After weeks of debate, they produced the Nicene Creed, which declared that the Son was true God and true man, and of the same substance as the Father. The council seemed to settle the matter, but Arianism continued to flourish. Several of Constantine's successors favored Arian theology. The controversy raged for decades, sometimes erupting into street violence between rival Christian factions. Emperor Theodosius I finally suppressed Arianism in the 3080s AD. The Council of Constantinople in 381 reaffirmed the Nicene Creed and added clauses about the Holy Spirit. This version of the creed, still recited in Christian churches today, became the orthodox statement of Byzantine Christian belief. Theodosius went further than his predecessors in Christianizing the empire. In 391 AD, he issued edicts banning pagan worship and ordering the closure of pagan temples. The Olympic Games, held continuously for over 1,000 years, were discontinued because of their pagan associations. Traditional Roman festivals were replaced with Christian holy days. The emperor also strengthened the position of Christian bishops. They gained judicial authority over their congregations and received exemptions from taxation. The Bishop of Constantinople, as Patriarch of the new capital, ranked second only to the Pope of Rome in ecclesiastical hierarchy. Byzantine Christianity developed distinctive characteristics that differentiated it from Western Christianity. Greek rather than Latin became the liturgical language. Eastern theologians emphasized the mystical aspects of faith more than their Western counterparts. Monks played a more prominent role in Eastern Christianity, often serving as bishops and advisors to emperors. The development of Christian art and architecture flourished in the new Christian empire. The original Hagia Sophia, though later rebuilt on a grander scale, pioneered the architectural style that would characterize Byzantine churches. Icons, painted images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and saints became central to Byzantine worship. Monasticism took root quickly in the Eastern Empire. The harsh landscapes of Asia Minor and Palestine attracted hermits seeking spiritual perfection through ascetic practices. Monastic communities preserved classical learning while copying manuscripts of both Christian and pagan authors. By 400 AD, Christianity had become not just the official religion of the Byzantine Empire, but its defining characteristic. The emperor was viewed as God's representative on earth, ruling a Christian commonwealth. This fusion of imperial power and Christian faith would remain central to Byzantine identity for over 1,000 years. The Christianization was not without controversy. Traditional pagan philosophers and aristocrats resented the new religion's dominance. Some pagans fled to Persia, where they could practice their ancient beliefs freely. Others converted publicly while maintaining private pagan practices. Jewish communities also faced increased pressure under the Christian Empire. While not subject to the same persecution as pagans, Jews lost many rights they had enjoyed under pagan emperors. Synagogue construction was restricted, and conversion from Christianity to Judaism was forbidden. Despite these tensions, the Christianization of the Byzantine Empire was remarkably successful. Within a few generations, Christianity had penetrated all levels of society. The empire that had once crucified Christ's followers now saw itself as the earthly manifestation of God's kingdom. The reign of Justinian when, from 527 to 565 AD, marked the golden age of the early Byzantine Empire. This remarkable emperor came closer than any other ruler to fulfilling the dream of restoring the Roman Empire to its ancient glory. His reign was marked by military conquests, architectural marvels, legal reforms, and cultural achievements that defined Byzantine civilization for centuries. Justinian was born around 482 AD in a small village in Macedonia. His uncle Justin, who rose from peasant origins to become emperor, brought the young man to Constantinople and provided him with an excellent education. When Justin died in 527, Justinian inherited not just a throne, but a burning ambition to reconquer the lost western territories of the Roman Empire. The new emperor was blessed with exceptional advisors and generals. His wife Theodora, a former actress who became co-empress, was perhaps the most influential woman in Byzantine history. The general Belisarius proved one of the greatest military commanders of any age. The architect Anthemius designed buildings that still inspire awe today. The lawyer Tribonian codified Roman law in forms that still influence legal systems worldwide. Justinian's first great achievement was suppressing the Nika riots in 532 AD. These massive civil disturbances began as factional violence between the Blues and Greens, the two chariot racing teams that commanded passionate loyalty in Constantinople. The riots escalated into a full-scale rebellion against the emperor, with mobs burning large sections of the city, including the original Hagia Sophia. At the height of the crisis, Justinian considered fleeing the capital. Empress Theodora reportedly told him, "Purple makes an excellent burial shroud," meaning that dying as emperor was preferable to living as an exile. Her courage stiffened Justinian's resolve. He ordered his general Belisarius to suppress the rebellion with maximum force. The troops killed an estimated 30,000 rioters in the Hippodrome, ending the uprising. The destruction caused by the Nika riots gave Justinian an opportunity to rebuild Constantinople on a grander scale. His greatest architectural achievement was the new Hagia Sophia, completed in just 5 years. This massive cathedral, with its soaring dome and revolutionary engineering, remained the largest church in the world for nearly 1,000 years. But Justinian's most ambitious project was the reconquest of the western territories lost to barbarian kingdoms. In 533 AD, he launched his first campaign against the Vandal kingdom in North Africa. General Belisarius led a relatively small force of 15,000 men across the Mediterranean. Within a year, he had crushed Vandal resistance and restored North Africa to imperial rule. Encouraged by this success, Justinian turned his attention to Italy, which had been ruled by the Ostrogoths since 4. The Italian campaign proved far more difficult than the African expedition. Fighting continued for nearly 20 years from 535 to 554 AD. Cities changed hands multiple times as Byzantine and Gothic armies maneuvered across the peninsula. The siege of Rome itself lasted over a year. Belisarius defended the ancient capital with fewer than 5,000 men against a Gothic army 10 times larger. Through brilliant tactics and engineering, he held the city until reinforcements arrived. The campaign devastated Italy, destroying much of the prosperity the peninsula had enjoyed under Gothic rule. Justinian's forces also reconquered parts of Spain from the Visigoths, though these gains proved temporary. At its greatest extent, around 555 AD, the Byzantine Empire controlled territories from the Crimea to Gibraltar, from the Danube to the Nile. For a brief moment, it appeared that the Roman Empire had been restored. The emperor's legal reforms proved more lasting than his military conquests. The Corpus Juris Civilis, or body of civil law, compiled under Tribonian's direction, represented the most important legal achievement in human history. This massive work organized over 1,000 years of Roman legal precedents into a coherent system. The corpus consisted of 4 parts. The Codex collected all valid imperial laws. The Digest summarized the writings of classical Roman jurists. The Institutes provided a legal textbook for students, and the novels contained new laws issued by Justinian himself. This legal code became the foundation for legal systems throughout Europe and continues to influence law today. Justinian also launched ambitious religious policies designed to unify his diverse empire under Orthodox Christianity. He closed the Academy of Athens, which had taught pagan philosophy for nearly 1,000 years. He built hundreds of churches and monasteries across his territories. He persecuted heretical sects and attempted to reconcile doctrinal differences that divided his Christian subjects. The emperor's building program extended far beyond Constantinople. The monastery of St. Catherine at Mount Sinai, built during his reign, still houses one of the world's greatest collections of early Christian manuscripts and icons. Fortifications constructed by Justinian's engineers protected the empire's frontiers from the Euphrates to the Danube. However, Justinian's ambitious policies came at enormous cost. The reconquest campaigns drained the imperial treasury. Heavy taxation required to fund these wars caused unrest in many provinces. The emperor became increasingly autocratic, brooking no opposition to his will. His later years were marked by theological controversies and military setbacks. The plague of Justinian, which struck the empire beginning in 541 AD, killed perhaps a third of the population. This catastrophe weakened the empire just as new enemies appeared on its frontiers. The Sassanid Persians renewed their attacks in the east, while Slavic and Bulgar tribes pressed against the Danube frontier. When Justinian died in 565 AD, his empire faced challenges on all sides. Within a generation, most of his western conquests had been lost to new barbarian invasions. The Lombards conquered much of Italy. The Arabs overran Byzantine territories in the Middle East and North Africa. Yet Justinian's cultural and legal achievements endured, defining Byzantine civilization long after his territorial gains had vanished. The Justinian Code and Legal Legacy. The legal reforms of Emperor Justinian I represent perhaps the most enduring achievement of the Byzantine Empire. The Corpus Juris Civilis, completed between 529 and 534 AD, not only organized centuries of Roman legal tradition, but created a comprehensive legal system that would influence jurisprudence for over 1,500 years. Roman law had developed organically over nearly a millennium before Justinian's reign. Beginning with the 12 Tables in the 5th century BC, Roman legal principles evolved through the decisions of magistrates, the opinions of legal scholars, and the edicts of emperors. By the 6th century AD, this body of law had become so vast and contradictory that even trained lawyers struggled to navigate it. Previous emperors had attempted partial codifications. The Theodosian Code of 438 AD had collected imperial laws from Constantine onward, but it covered only a fraction of legal issues. Private collections of legal opinions existed, but they often contradicted each other. The Roman legal system that had once been the empire's glory had become an incomprehensible maze. Justinian recognized that legal reform was essential to effective governance. In February 528 AD, he appointed a commission of 10 legal experts led by Tribonian, his chief legal advisor. Their first task was to create a new code, collecting all valid imperial laws from the time of Hadrian onward. The commission worked with remarkable speed. They reviewed over 2,000 imperial constitutions, dating back 4 centuries. They eliminated obsolete or contradictory laws, while updating others to reflect current conditions. The resulting Codex Justinianus, published in April 529 AD, reduced centuries of imperial legislation to a manageable collection. But the Codex represented only a fraction of Roman legal tradition. The opinions of classical jurists like Ulpian, Paul, and Papinian formed the heart of Roman jurisprudence. These writings, scattered across hundreds of works, contained the legal principles that actually governed daily life in the empire. In December 5030 AD, Justinian commissioned a much more ambitious project. Tribonian assembled a team of 16 lawyers and legal scholars to create a comprehensive digest of classical Roman jurisprudence. They were given just 3 years to complete a task that seemed impossible. The commission examined over 2,000 volumes containing 3 million lines of legal text. They extracted the essential principles, eliminated redundancies, and resolved contradictions. The resulting digest, published in December 53 AD, distilled a millennium of legal wisdom into 50 books containing about 150,000 lines. Simultaneously, Tribonian's team prepared the Institutes, an introductory textbook for law students, based partly on the 2nd century Institutes of Gaius. This work explained basic legal principles in clear, accessible language. The Institutes became the standard legal textbook throughout the Byzantine Empire and later in medieval Europe. Finally, the novels collected new laws issued by Justinian after the publication of the Codex. These laws addressed contemporary issues not covered in the earlier compilations. Unlike the other parts of the corpus, many of the novels were written in Greek rather than Latin, reflecting the linguistic evolution of the Byzantine Empire. The completed Corpus Juris Civilis represented the most sophisticated legal system the ancient world had produced. It established fundamental principles that remain central to legal systems today: the presumption of innocence, the right to legal representation, and the concept that laws should be written and publicly accessible, all trace their origins to Justinian's Code. The code also reflected Christian influence on Roman law. Justinian modified traditional Roman legal principles to align with Christian moral teaching. He strengthened protections for slaves and women, while restricting practices that Christianity condemned. The code declared that marriage should be based on mutual consent and affection, rather than merely economic considerations. Implementation of the new code throughout the empire proved challenging. Legal education had to be reorganized to teach the new system. Judges and lawyers needed retraining. Provincial administrators struggled to apply uniform legal standards across diverse populations. The process of legal integration took generations to complete. The code's influence extended far beyond the Byzantine Empire. When Justinian's Western conquests brought Roman law back to Italy, legal scholars in Bologna began studying the corpus in the 11th century. This revival of Roman law sparked the development of canon law, commercial law, and eventually the modern legal systems of continental Europe. Medieval universities made Justinian's Code the foundation of legal education. Students from across Europe traveled to Bologna, Padua, and other law schools to study civil law alongside canon law. The phrase Legum Baccalaureus, Bachelor of Laws, originally referred to students who had mastered Justinian's Code. The code also influenced the development of international law. Hugo Grotius and other early international lawyers drew heavily on Roman legal principles preserved in the corpus. Concepts like sovereignty, treaty obligations, and just war theory all have roots in Justinian's legal reforms. Even legal systems not directly descended from Roman law show the code's influence. The Louisiana Civil Code, based on French law descended from Roman sources, still reflects principles established by Justinian's lawyers. The legal systems of Scotland, South Africa, and many Latin American countries similarly trace elements back to the Corpus Juris Civilis. Modern legal scholars continue to study Justinian's Code not just for its historical significance, but for its sophisticated treatment of fundamental legal problems. The code's approach to property rights, contractual obligations, and criminal justice provides insights that remain relevant today. The preservation of classical Roman legal learning was itself a crucial achievement. Without Justinian's codification, much of Roman jurisprudence would have been lost forever. The digest preserved the writings of classical jurists whose original works have since vanished. This legal treasure trove became one of the most important legacies of the ancient world. In the Byzantine Empire itself, the Justinian Code remained the basic law for nearly 9 centuries. Later emperors issued new legislation, but the fundamental structure established by Justinian endured until the empire's fall in 1453. Even today, when lawyers speak of civil law as distinct from common law, they are referring to legal traditions that trace their origins back to the courtrooms of 6th century Constantinople. The construction of Hagia Sophia. The Hagia Sophia stands as perhaps the greatest architectural achievement of the Byzantine Empire, and one of the most remarkable buildings ever constructed, built in just 5 years and 10 months under Emperor Justinian I. This cathedral revolutionized architecture and remained the largest enclosed space in the world for nearly 1,000 years. The story of Hagia Sophia begins with destruction. The Nika riots of 532 AD had burned much of Constantinople, including the original church of Hagia Sophia, built by Constantine's son Constantius. As Justinian surveyed the smoking ruins of his capital, he saw an opportunity to create something unprecedented in human history. The emperor spared no expense in planning his new cathedral. He summoned Anthemius of Tralles, a mathematician and physicist who had studied the geometry of curved surfaces, and Isidore of Miletus, an engineer famous for his knowledge of mechanics and materials. Together, these two masters would solve architectural problems that had challenged builders for centuries. Justinian's vision was audacious beyond imagination. He wanted a church larger than any building ever constructed, crowned with a dome that would seem to float in the air. The dome was to span over 100 feet, larger than the Pantheon in Rome. But unlike the Pantheon, Justinian's dome would sit not on solid walls but on an open space supported by revolutionary engineering. Construction began on February 23, 532 AD, barely a month after the riots ended. Justinian mobilized resources from across his empire. Marble columns were stripped from temples in Ephesus and Baalbek. Purple porphyry came from Egypt, green marble from Thessaly, black stone from the Bosphorus. Gold for mosaics was imported from distant mines, while silver fittings were cast in imperial workshops. The workforce was as impressive as the materials. Over 10,000 workers labored on the project, under the direction of 100 master craftsmen. Specialized teams included marble cutters from Proconnesus, mosaic artists from Ravenna, and metal workers from Damascus. The emperor personally inspected the work daily, driving the project forward with relentless energy. The revolutionary design centered on the enormous central dome, 1,002 feet in diameter, and rising 180 feet above the floor. Traditional Roman domes like the Pantheon were supported by thick circular walls. Anthemius and Isidore faced a far greater challenge, supporting their dome over a rectangular space while maintaining open sightlines throughout the interior. Their solution was the pendentive, a curved triangular surface that transferred the dome's weight to 4 massive piers. This innovation allowed the dome to appear to float above the vast interior space. Contemporary observers described the dome as seeming suspended by a golden chain from heaven, so revolutionary was the engineering. The dome itself was constructed using a lightweight concrete made with pumice stone, quarried from the volcanic regions of Asia Minor. 40 windows around the dome's base flooded the interior with light while reducing the structure's weight. The visual effect was magical. The dome seemed to glow from within, earning it the description as a work not of human art, but truly sent down from heaven. Supporting the central dome was an intricate system of half-domes, barrel vaults, and arches that distributed its enormous weight. The western and eastern ends of the building featured large half-domes, while smaller semi-domes created a cascading rhythm of curved surfaces. This system of mutual support allowed the interior to remain remarkably open despite the building's massive scale. The interior decoration matched the architectural innovation. Justinian covered the walls and dome with over 4 acres of gold mosaics that sparkled in the light from the dome's windows. The altar area featured elaborate silk curtains embroidered with golden threads. The floor was paved with marble in complex geometric patterns that created optical illusions of movement. The architectural acoustics of Hagia Sophia were as carefully planned as its visual impact. The dome and curved surfaces created a reverberation time of over 10 seconds, transforming human voices into ethereal sounds that seemed to descend from heaven. Chanted liturgies echoed and multiplied throughout the vast space, creating an otherworldly auditory experience. Construction proceeded with remarkable speed despite the project's complexity. The main structure was completed by 537 AD, though interior decoration continued for several more years. The speed of construction, combined with the innovative engineering, may have contributed to structural problems that appeared almost immediately. The first dome partially collapsed during an earthquake in 558 AD, just 20 years after completion. Isidore the Younger, nephew of the original architect, rebuilt it with a steeper profile that proved more stable. This second dome, completed in 563 AD, is essentially the structure that survives today. The completed Hagia Sophia measured 269 feet long and 240 feet wide, with the central dome rising 180 feet above the floor. The total internal volume exceeded 600,000 cubic feet, making it the largest enclosed space in the world, until the construction of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome over 1,000 years later. When Justinian first entered the completed cathedral, he reportedly exclaimed, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." This boast was not mere imperial vanity. The Hagia Sophia was indeed larger and more technically advanced than Solomon's temple, establishing new standards for monumental architecture. The influence of Hagia Sophia on subsequent architecture cannot be overstated. The building established the classic Byzantine church design with its central dome, pendentives, and supporting half-domes. This architectural vocabulary spread throughout the Orthodox Christian world, from Russia to the Balkans to the Eastern Mediterranean. Islamic architects were equally impressed when the Ottomans conquered Constantinople in 1453. Rather than destroying the building, they converted it into a mosque, adding minarets but preserving the essential structure. The great Ottoman architect Sinan studied Hagia Sophia intensively, using its lessons in his design of the Süleymaniye Mosque and other masterpieces. The survival of Hagia Sophia through nearly 15 centuries of earthquakes, wars, and political upheavals testifies to the genius of its original designers. Despite serving as a church for over 900 years, a mosque for nearly 500 years, and now a museum, the building remains structurally sound, its great dome still floating impossibly above the vast interior space. Today, visitors from around the world continue to experience the sense of awe that struck Justinian's contemporaries. The interplay of light and space, the mathematical precision of the curved surfaces, and the sheer scale of the achievement still inspire wonder. In Hagia Sophia, Anthemius and Isidore created not just a building, but a vision of the divine made manifest in stone, brick, and mortar. The Plague of Justinian. In the year 541 AD, at the height of Justinian's glory, a catastrophe struck that would fundamentally alter the course of Byzantine history. The Plague of Justinian, as historians now call it, was the first recorded pandemic in human history. This devastating disease killed millions across the Mediterranean world and marked the beginning of the end for Justinian's dream of restored Roman greatness. The plague arrived in Constantinople, aboard ships carrying grain from Egypt. The disease had likely originated in Central Asia or East Africa before spreading along trade routes to the great cities of the ancient world. Egyptian merchants unknowingly carried infected fleas and rats in their cargo holds, transporting death to the heart of the Byzantine Empire. The first cases appeared in the Egyptian port city of Pelusium in 540 AD. Within months, the disease had spread throughout Egypt and into Palestine and Syria. Ships carrying infected cargo brought the plague to Constantinople in the spring of 541 AD. From there, it radiated outward along the empire's extensive trade networks. Contemporary accounts describe symptoms that modern medical historians identify as bubonic plague, the same disease that would later devastate Europe as the Black Death. Victims developed high fevers and painful swellings, called buboes, in their lymph nodes. Many died within days of showing symptoms. Some fortunate individuals recovered and seemed to gain immunity, but the vast majority who contracted the disease perished in agony. The historian Procopius, who witnessed the plague firsthand in Constantinople, left a detailed account of the catastrophe. He described bodies piling up in the streets faster than they could be buried. The imperial government organized mass cremations and burial sites outside the city walls. Ships were loaded with corpses and sent out to sea where they were sunk in deep water. The plague struck all levels of Byzantine society without discrimination. Peasants and emperors, merchants and monks, soldiers and scholars all fell victim to the disease. Even Justinian himself contracted the plague in 542 AD, though he was among the fortunate few who recovered. His illness lasted several months and temporarily paralyzed the imperial government. The demographic impact was catastrophic. Modern estimates suggest that the plague killed between 25 and 50% of the population in affected regions. Constantinople, which had grown to perhaps 500,000 inhabitants, may have lost half its population. Rural areas suffered equally severe losses as the disease spread along roads and rivers throughout the empire. The economic consequences were equally devastating. Trade networks collapsed as merchants feared venturing into infected regions. Agricultural production plummeted as farmers died or fled their fields. Tax revenues, already strained by Justinian's expensive wars and building projects, fell dramatically. The empire that had seemed on the verge of restoring ancient Roman glory suddenly found itself struggling for survival. Military operations ground to a halt as armies were decimated by disease. Belisarius, still campaigning in Italy against the Ostrogoths, found his forces too weakened to continue offensive operations. Persian armies, also affected by the plague, were unable to take advantage of Byzantine weakness. The great age of Justinian's conquests effectively ended with the arrival of the plague. The plague also had profound psychological and spiritual effects. Many Byzantines interpreted the catastrophe as divine punishment for sins or as a sign of the approaching end of the world. Christian theologians struggled to explain why God would inflict such suffering on a Christian empire. Some heretical movements gained followers among those seeking alternative explanations for the disaster. Monastic communities, which had played crucial roles in preserving classical learning and providing social services, were particularly hard hit. Many monasteries lost most of their inhabitants, disrupting the copying of manuscripts and the maintenance of schools and hospitals. Decades of cultural and educational progress were undone in a few short years. The plague continued to strike the Byzantine Empire in recurring waves for the next 2 centuries. Major outbreaks occurred roughly every generation, preventing population recovery and maintaining constant pressure on imperial resources. Each new wave brought fresh devastation to communities just beginning to recover from previous epidemics. Urban areas proved especially vulnerable to the disease. Constantinople experienced major outbreaks in 558, 573, 586, 599, and 6118. Each epidemic killed thousands and disrupted the complex administrative and commercial networks that held the empire together. The great cities that had been centers of Byzantine civilization became death traps during plague years. The plague fundamentally altered the military balance in the Mediterranean world. The Byzantine Empire, weakened by massive population losses, could no longer maintain the large armies that had enabled Justinian's conquests. New enemies, less affected by the disease, began pressing against imperial frontiers. The Slavs moved south into the Balkans, while Arab tribes prepared for the conquests that would sweep away Byzantine control of the Middle East and North Africa. Recovery proved slow and incomplete. Even when the plague finally subsided in the 8th century, the Byzantine Empire never regained the population levels or economic prosperity of Justinian's era. The demographic catastrophe of the 6th century marked the permanent end of the classical world and the beginning of a new, more austere phase of Byzantine history. Modern historians now recognize the plague of Justinian as one of history's great turning points. Like the Black Death of the 14th century or the Spanish flu of 1918, this pandemic reshaped human civilization. The confident expansionist empire of Justinian's early reign gave way to a smaller, more defensive state struggling to preserve what remained of Roman greatness. The rise of Islam and early Arab conquests. The rise of Islam in the 7th century presented the Byzantine Empire with its greatest existential threat since the barbarian invasions that had destroyed the Western Roman Empire. Within a single generation, Arab armies inspired by the new faith conquered 2/3 of Byzantine territory, reducing the empire from a Mediterranean superpower to a regional power centered on Asia Minor and the Balkans. The Arabian Peninsula had remained largely outside the sphere of great power politics for centuries. The Byzantines and Persians occasionally intervened in Arabian affairs, supporting rival tribes or trading partners, but neither empire considered the region strategically important. Most Arabs lived as nomadic herders or settled farmers in oasis communities, divided into hundreds of competing tribes with no central authority. This changed dramatically with the preaching of Muhammad beginning around 610 AD. The prophet's message of monotheism and social justice attracted followers throughout the Arabian Peninsula. By his death in 632 AD, Muhammad had united most Arab tribes under the banner of Islam and established a new kind of state based on religious rather than tribal identity. The first Arab attacks on Byzantine territory began as raids rather than conquests. Abu Bakr, the first caliph or successor to Muhammad, launched expeditions into Palestine and Syria in 634 AD. These initial raids were intended to secure booty and test Byzantine defenses rather than establish permanent control. The Byzantine response was hampered by decades of devastating warfare with Persia. The last great Roman-Persian war from 602 to 628 AD had exhausted both empires. Emperor Heraclius had finally defeated the Sassanids and restored Byzantine control over Syria and Egypt, but the victory came at enormous cost. The imperial treasury was empty and the army was exhausted. The Arabs proved far more formidable opponents than anyone had anticipated. United by religious fervor and led by brilliant commanders like Khalid ibn al-Walid, Arab armies combined the mobility of desert warfare with sophisticated tactics learned from Byzantine and Persian prisoners. Their horses and camels gave them strategic mobility that the heavier Byzantine forces could not match. The decisive battle came at Yarmouk in August 636 AD. Emperor Heraclius had assembled a massive army of perhaps 40,000 men to drive the Arabs from Syria. The Byzantine force included the empire's best troops along with Armenian, Arab, and Ghassanid allies. Against them, Khalid ibn al-Walid deployed roughly 25,000 Arab warriors. The battle lasted 6 days across the harsh terrain east of the Jordan River. Byzantine tactical superiority initially seemed decisive, as their disciplined infantry formations held against Arab cavalry charges. But Khalid's strategic genius ultimately prevailed. He used a double envelopment maneuver, attacking the Byzantine flanks while dust storms blinded the enemy. The Byzantine army collapsed, with most soldiers killed or captured. The victory at Yarmouk opened all of Syria to Arab conquest. Damascus fell within months, followed by Jerusalem in 638 AD, after a siege lasting 4 months. The Patriarch of Jerusalem surrendered the city directly to Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, who guaranteed protection for Christian holy sites. The symbolic importance of this surrender cannot be overstated. The holy city, recovered from the Persians just a decade earlier, was lost forever to Christendom. Arab armies simultaneously invaded Egypt, the richest province of the Byzantine Empire. General Amr ibn al-As crossed the desert from Palestine in 639 AD and besieged the fortress city of Babylon near modern Cairo. The siege lasted 7 months, but the Arabs ultimately prevailed through a combination of military pressure and negotiations with local Coptic Christians who had suffered under Byzantine religious persecution. Alexandria, the second largest city in the Byzantine Empire, fell in 641 AD after a siege lasting 14 months. The loss of Egypt was catastrophic for Byzantium. Egyptian grain had fed Constantinople for centuries, while Egyptian taxes funded the imperial government. The province had also been the empire's main source of papyrus, forcing administrators to switch to more expensive parchment for official documents. The speed and completeness of Arab success shocked the medieval world. Within just 20 years, the Arabs had conquered territories that Rome had ruled for over 6 centuries. Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and much of Asia Minor fell to armies that most Byzantines had initially dismissed as barbarian raiders. Several factors explain the Arabs' remarkable success. Religious motivation provided powerful inspiration for warriors who believed they were fighting for God's cause. The promise of paradise for those killed in holy war made Arab soldiers willing to accept enormous risks. The policy of religious tolerance for people of the book, Christians and Jews, reduced local resistance to Arab rule. The Byzantines also faced serious disadvantages beyond military factors. The empire was financially exhausted by the Persian Wars and the plague of Justinian. Religious controversies, particularly the Monophysite heresy popular in Syria and Egypt, had alienated many subjects from the imperial government. Local populations often welcomed Arab conquerors as liberators from Byzantine oppression. The Arab conquest fundamentally transformed the Byzantine Empire. The loss of Syria, Palestine, and Egypt reduced imperial territory by more than half. Tax revenues fell correspondingly, forcing dramatic reductions in military and administrative spending. The empire that had once stretched from Spain to Mesopotamia was reduced to Asia Minor, the Balkans, and a few scattered territories. Perhaps more importantly, the conquests ended Byzantine control of the eastern Mediterranean. For centuries, this sea had been a Roman lake dominated by imperial fleets. Arab naval forces, initially equipped with ships captured from Byzantine arsenals, gradually contested Byzantine maritime supremacy. The construction of new Arab fleets in Egyptian and Syrian shipyards eventually gave the caliphate effective control over much of the Mediterranean. The psychological impact was equally significant. Byzantines had viewed their empire as God's chosen instrument on earth, destined to rule until the second coming of Christ. The success of a non-Christian power challenged these fundamental beliefs and forced a reassessment of Byzantine identity and purpose. The Arab conquests also marked the beginning of a new phase in world history. The unified caliphate that stretched from Spain to Central Asia became the medieval world's largest empire. Trade routes that had connected East and West for centuries fell under Muslim control. The classical Mediterranean world, already weakened by plague and warfare, was permanently divided between Christian and Islamic civilizations. The iconoclastic crisis. The iconoclastic crisis of the 8th and 9th centuries tore the Byzantine Empire apart in a theological and political struggle that lasted over a century. This conflict over the use of religious images in Christian worship divided families, sparked civil wars, and fundamentally altered the relationship between church and state in Byzantium. Icons had played a central role in Byzantine Christianity since the 4th century. These painted images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and saints adorned churches and private homes throughout the empire. Byzantines believed that icons served as windows to the divine, allowing the faithful to communicate with heavenly beings through their earthly representations. The veneration of icons had developed elaborate rituals and theological justifications by the 7th century. Believers kissed icons, lit candles before them, and prayed to the figures they depicted. Some icons were credited with miraculous powers, particularly the Hodegetria icon of the Virgin Mary, which was said to have been painted by Saint Luke himself. Opposition to icon veneration had always existed within Christianity. Some theologians argued that the Second Commandment's prohibition against graven images applied to all religious art. Others worried that icon veneration resembled pagan idol worship. These concerns intensified during the 7th century as Byzantine territories fell to Muslim armies whose faith strictly forbade religious images. The theological debate became a political crisis when Emperor Leo III issued his first edict against icons in 726 AD. Leo was a successful military commander who had saved the empire from Arab siege of Constantinople in 718. His victory seemed to confirm divine favor, lending authority to his religious reforms. Leo's iconoclastic policy had multiple motivations. Military defeats against Muslim armies raised questions about God's favor toward the Christian empire. Some advisors suggested that icon veneration had angered the Almighty, who was punishing Byzantium through military losses. The success of iconoclastic Islam seemed to support this interpretation. Political considerations also influenced Leo's decision. The powerful monastic movement strongly supported icon veneration and commanded considerable wealth and influence. By attacking icons, Leo could reduce monastic power while confiscating valuable church property for military expenses. The policy also appealed to military commanders from Asia Minor, where iconoclastic sentiments were stronger. The emperor's first iconoclastic measures provoked immediate resistance. When soldiers attempted to remove the famous image of Christ above the bronze gate of the Great Palace, a crowd of women attacked them, killing the officer in charge. Pope Gregory II, in Rome, condemned Leo's policy and threatened excommunication. Revolts broke out in Greece and Italy as local populations defended their beloved icons. Leo's son Constantine V, who ruled from 741 to 775 AD, pursued iconoclasm even more aggressively than his father. Constantine convened the Council of Hagia in 754 AD, which formally condemned icon veneration as heretical. The council declared that Christ's divine nature could not be depicted in material images, and that attempts to do so constituted either Nestorianism or monophysitism. Constantine's persecution of icon supporters reached extreme levels. Monks and nuns who refused to abandon their icons faced imprisonment, torture, and execution. The emperor ordered the destruction of countless works of art, including mosaics in Hagia Sophia and icons in churches throughout the empire. Relics of saints were also destroyed or removed from churches. The iconoclastic period saw the emergence of powerful theological defenders of icons. St. John of Damascus, writing from the safety of Muslim-controlled Palestine, developed sophisticated arguments for icon veneration. He distinguished between worship due to God alone and the veneration appropriately offered to images. Icons, he argued, were books for the illiterate and windows to the divine realm. The iconoclastic crisis deeply divided Byzantine society. Families split between iconoclasts and iconophiles. The imperial court was purged of icon supporters, while the church hierarchy was filled with iconoclastic appointees. Monasteries, the traditional centers of learning and charity, suffered devastating persecution. Many monks fled to southern Italy or other regions beyond imperial control. The crisis also had significant international ramifications. The Pope's opposition to iconoclasm strained relations between Constantinople and Rome. Italian territories, under Byzantine control, revolted against iconoclastic governors. The Frankish kingdom, allied with the Pope, began asserting greater independence from Byzantine authority. Women played particularly prominent roles in defending icons. Empress Irene, who served as regent for her young son Constantine VI after 780 AD, was a secret iconophile who worked to restore icon veneration. She faced considerable opposition from iconoclastic military commanders and court officials who viewed her policies as weakness. The Seventh Ecumenical Council, convened by Empress Irene in 787 AD at Nicaea, formally restored icon veneration. The council distinguished between worship and veneration, declaring that icons could be venerated but not worshipped. The assembled bishops condemned the iconoclastic period as heretical and restored icons to their traditional place in Byzantine Christianity. However, the restoration proved temporary. Emperor Leo V revived iconoclasm in 815 AD, beginning a second iconoclastic period that lasted until 843. This later phase was less severe than Constantine V's persecution, but still involved the removal of icons from churches and the dismissal of iconophile clergy. The final restoration of icons came during the regency of Empress Theodora, widow of the iconoclastic Emperor Theophilus. In 843 AD, she convened a council that definitively condemned iconoclasm and restored icons to their traditional place in Byzantine worship. This event is still celebrated in Orthodox Christianity as the triumph of orthodoxy. The iconoclastic crisis had lasting consequences for Byzantine civilization. The destruction of countless works of art represented an irreplaceable cultural loss. Many manuscripts, mosaics, and paintings from the early Byzantine period were destroyed and survive today only in copies made after the restoration. The crisis also strengthened the power of the emperor over the church. Iconoclastic emperors had demonstrated their ability to impose theological changes despite clerical opposition. This precedent would influence church-state relations for centuries. The emperor's role as defender of orthodoxy became even more central to Byzantine political theory. The theological resolution of the crisis helped define Orthodox Christianity's distinctive character. The defense of icons became a central element of Orthodox identity, distinguishing it from both Catholic and Protestant Christianity. The sophisticated theological arguments developed during the crisis influenced Christian art and worship practices far beyond the Byzantine Empire. The crisis also marked a turning point in Byzantine cultural development. The empire emerged from iconoclasm with a renewed commitment to traditional Orthodox Christianity, but also with a more defensive mentality. The confident expansion of Justinian's era gave way to a more cautious approach, focused on preserving rather than spreading Byzantine civilization. The Macedonian Renaissance. The Macedonian dynasty, which ruled the Byzantine Empire from 867 to 1056 AD, presided over one of the most brilliant periods in Byzantine history. This era, known as the Macedonian Renaissance, witnessed military victories, cultural achievements, economic prosperity, and territorial expansion that restored the empire to great power status. The dynasty was founded by Basil I, an Armenian peasant who rose to become co-emperor and eventually sole ruler after the assassination of Michael III in 8067 AD. Despite his humble origins and violent path to power, Basil proved an exceptionally capable ruler who established the foundations for 2 centuries of Byzantine greatness. Basil's most important achievement was military rather than cultural. He reversed decades of territorial losses by launching successful campaigns against the Arabs in southern Italy and the eastern Mediterranean. Byzantine forces recaptured Bari in 876 AD, restoring imperial control over much of southern Italy. Naval expeditions reconquered Crete from the Arabs, ending a century and a half of Muslim rule over this strategically vital island. The emperor also initiated important legal reforms that updated Justinian's code for medieval conditions. The Basilica, completed under his successors, translated the old Latin legal texts into Greek and modified them to reflect contemporary needs. This legal compilation remained the foundation of Byzantine law until the empire's fall and influenced legal development throughout the Orthodox world. Basil's son Leo VI, known as Leo the Wise, continued his father's policies while adding his own scholarly contributions. Leo was perhaps the most intellectual emperor in Byzantine history, writing works on military tactics, civil law, and theology. His tactics became the standard military manual throughout medieval Europe, while his legal writings clarified complex points of civil law. Leo's reign saw the completion of several major building projects begun under his father. The restoration of damaged churches continued throughout the empire, while new monasteries were founded to replace those destroyed during iconoclasm. The great palace in Constantinople was expanded and redecorated, becoming one of medieval Europe's most magnificent royal residences. The true glory of the Macedonian Renaissance came under Basil II, known as the Bulgar Slayer, who ruled from 976 to 1025 AD. This emperor's 49-year reign was the longest in Byzantine history and marked the empire's greatest territorial extent since Justinian's conquests. Basil was a military genius whose campaigns restored Byzantine dominance in the Balkans and expanded imperial control in the east. Basil's most famous campaigns were against the Bulgarian Empire, which had emerged as Byzantium's most dangerous neighbor in the Balkans. The First Bulgarian Empire, founded in 681 AD, had grown to control much of the Balkan Peninsula and posed a constant threat to Constantinople. Previous emperors had attempted to conquer Bulgaria, but had failed due to the fierce resistance of the Bulgarian rulers and their Slavic subjects. The Bulgarian Wars began in earnest in 986 AD, when Basil launched his first major campaign against Tsar Samuel's forces. The war continued for nearly 4 decades, as both sides fought for control of key fortresses and strategic mountain passes. The conflict was marked by extraordinary brutality, with both armies devastating the countryside and massacring captured enemies. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Clydion in 1014 AD. Basil's forces surrounded and annihilated Samuel's army in a mountain valley, capturing an estimated 15,000 Bulgarian soldiers. According to contemporary accounts, Basil ordered the prisoners blinded, leaving only one eye for every 100 men to guide the others home. When Samuel saw his ruined army, he reportedly died of shock. The fall of Bulgaria in 1018 AD marked the height of Byzantine power in the medieval period. The empire now controlled the entire Balkan Peninsula from the Danube to the Peloponnese. This territorial expansion was accompanied by a massive influx of new taxpayers and soldiers, strengthening the empire's resources for future conflicts. Basil II also achieved significant successes in the east, where Byzantine armies reconquered much of Syria and advanced to the gates of Jerusalem. These campaigns restored imperial control over territories lost to the Arabs 3 centuries earlier. At Basil's death in 1025 AD, The empire stretched from the Euphrates to the Danube, encompassing nearly all the territory it had held under Justinian. The military successes of the Macedonian period were accompanied by remarkable cultural achievements. This era saw a conscious revival of classical learning that earned it the name Renaissance. Byzantine scholars rediscovered and copied ancient Greek texts that had been neglected during the iconoclastic period. The Imperial Library in Constantinople became one of medieval Europe's greatest repositories of classical knowledge. The revival of learning was led by scholar emperors like Constantine the Porphyrogenitus, who wrote detailed accounts of court ceremonies and imperial administration. His work on governing the empire provided practical advice on diplomacy and strategy while preserving invaluable information about medieval European peoples and kingdoms. Art and architecture flourished during this period as emperors commissioned new churches and decorative programs. The monastery of Hosios Loukas in Greece, built during the 10th century, exemplifies the refined aesthetic of Macedonian art. Its mosaics and frescoes demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of classical proportions and Byzantine theological symbolism. The period also witnessed significant developments in religious art and theology. The restoration of icon veneration after 843 AD led to an explosion of artistic creativity as churches throughout the empire were redecorated with new mosaics and frescoes. The theological synthesis achieved during this period established the doctrinal foundations of Orthodox Christianity that continue to the present day. Economic prosperity accompanied military and cultural achievements. The Byzantine gold coin, became the standard currency for international trade throughout Europe and the Mediterranean. Italian merchants established trading posts in Constantinople, while Byzantine goods found markets from Scandinavia to India. This commercial revival provided the tax revenues that funded the empire's military and cultural achievements. The success of the Macedonian period created a sense of renewed confidence in Byzantine civilization. Emperors began styling themselves as equals of the Western emperors and caliphs, rather than merely regional rulers. Diplomatic marriages connected the imperial family to royal houses throughout Europe, while Byzantine culture influenced artistic and intellectual development from Kiev to Venice. However, the very success of the Macedonian Renaissance contained the seeds of future problems. The constant warfare that expanded the empire's borders was enormously expensive and relied heavily on the military genius of emperors like Basil II. The complex administrative system that governed the expanded empire required capable leadership at all levels. Most importantly, the empire had become so large that defending its extended frontiers would prove increasingly difficult. The Great Schism of 105-4. The Great Schism of 1054 AD marked the formal division of Christianity into Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, ending over 1,000 years of Christian unity and permanently altering the relationship between Constantinople and Rome. This theological and political rupture reflected centuries of growing differences in doctrine, liturgy, and ecclesiastical authority. The roots of the schism traced back to the early centuries of Christianity, when the Church had developed different traditions in East and West. The Eastern churches, centered in Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem, conducted their liturgies in Greek and emphasized mystical theology. The Western Church, centered in Rome, used Latin and developed more systematic theological approaches. Political factors complicated these theological differences. The Bishop of Rome claimed primacy over all Christian churches based on Jesus' words to Peter about being the rock on which the church was built. Eastern bishops acknowledged Rome's honorary primacy, but rejected any claims to universal jurisdiction. They viewed themselves as equals governing autocephalous or independent churches. The iconoclastic crisis of the 8th and 9th centuries had severely strained East-West relations. While Byzantine emperors destroyed icons and persecuted their supporters, the popes consistently defended icon veneration. This disagreement reinforced perceptions that East and West followed different forms of Christianity. Differences in clerical practice also created tensions. Eastern priests were allowed to marry before ordination, while Western priests were required to remain celibate. The Eastern churches used leavened bread for communion, while the West insisted on unleavened bread. These liturgical differences seemed minor, but symbolized deeper theological disagreements about the nature of Christian worship. The most serious doctrinal dispute concerned the filioque, a Latin phrase meaning "and the Son." The original Nicene Creed stated that the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father. Western churches had gradually added the phrase "and the Son," declaring that the Spirit proceeded from both Father and Son. Eastern churches viewed this addition as heretical and unauthorized. The immediate crisis began in 1053 AD, when the Norman ruler Robert Guiscard conquered Byzantine territories in southern Italy. The Normans, who were Roman Catholics, forced Greek churches in their new territories to adopt Latin liturgical practices. They required priests to use unleavened bread for communion and to shave their beards in accordance with Western custom. Archbishop Leo of Ohrid, a prominent Eastern prelate, wrote a letter condemning these forced changes. His letter reached Humbert of Silva Candida, the papal legate in Constantinople, who viewed it as an attack on papal authority. Humbert demanded that Patriarch Michael I Ceriolius of Constantinople repudiate Leo's letter and submit to papal supremacy. Patriarch Michael refused Humbert's demands, arguing that the Patriarch of Constantinople held equal authority with the Pope of Rome. As Patriarch of the imperial capital, he claimed precedence in the Eastern churches, just as the Pope claimed precedence in the West. This disagreement over ecclesiastical authority became the central issue in the developing crisis. Emperor Constantine IX, Monomachos, attempted to mediate between the feuding churchmen. He needed papal support for his military campaigns in southern Italy and could not afford a complete break with Rome. The emperor arranged meetings between Humbert and Michael, hoping to resolve their differences through diplomatic compromise. The negotiations failed spectacularly. Humbert was an inflexible theologian who viewed any resistance to papal authority as heretical. Michael was equally committed to maintaining the independence of the Eastern churches. Neither man was willing to compromise on fundamental principles of ecclesiastical governance. On July 16, 1054 AD, Humbert entered Hagia Sophia during the celebration of divine liturgy and placed a bull of excommunication on the main altar. The document condemned Michael Ceriolius and his supporters as heretics and schismatics who had separated themselves from the true church. Humbert then departed Constantinople, shaking the dust from his feet as a sign of divine judgment. The Patriarch responded by convening a synod of Eastern bishops that excommunicated Humbert and declared the papal claims to universal authority as uncanonical. The synod affirmed the independence of the Eastern churches while condemning Western innovations like the filioque and clerical celibacy. The mutual excommunications of 154 did not immediately result in a complete break between East and West. Many Christians on both sides hoped for eventual reconciliation. Political necessities often required cooperation between Constantinople and Rome, despite theological differences. Trade and diplomatic relations continued between Byzantine and Western territories. However, the schism gradually deepened as both sides developed more rigid positions. Eastern theologians systematically refuted Western doctrines, while Western scholars defended papal supremacy with increasing vigor. The theological differences that had once seemed negotiable became insurmountable obstacles to unity. The Crusades, beginning in 1095 AD, further complicated East-West relations. While the First Crusade achieved some cooperation between Byzantine and Western forces, later crusades often brought Byzantine and Western Christians into direct conflict. The sack of Constantinople by the Fourth Crusade in 1204 AD created lasting bitterness between the churches. Attempts at reunion continued sporadically throughout the medieval period. The Second Council of Lyon in 1274 and the Council of Florence in 1439 achieved temporary agreements on theological issues. However, these unions were rejected by the Eastern clergy and faithful, who viewed them as betrayals of Orthodox tradition. The fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans in 1453 AD ended any realistic possibility of reunion between the churches. The Orthodox Patriarch now served under Muslim rule and could not negotiate with the Pope on equal terms. The Russian Orthodox Church, which claimed to be the heir of Byzantine Orthodoxy, maintained its independence from Rome. The Great Schism had profound consequences for both Eastern and Western Christianity. The Eastern churches developed distinctive theological and liturgical traditions that emphasized mysticism and theosis or deification. The Western Church became increasingly centralized under papal authority and developed systematic theology and canon law. The schism also affected the development of European civilization. Eastern Europe remained within the Orthodox sphere of influence while Western Europe developed under Catholic leadership. These religious differences contributed to distinct political, cultural, and intellectual traditions that persist to the present day. Modern ecumenical movements have sought to heal the ancient divisions between Orthodox and Catholic Christianity. The mutual lifting of excommunications by Pope Paul VI and Patriarch Athenagoras I in 1965 marked a significant step toward reconciliation. However, fundamental disagreements about papal authority and theological development continue to prevent full reunion between the churches. The Crusades and Byzantine relations with the West. The Crusades, which began in 1095 AD and continued sporadically for over 2 centuries, fundamentally altered the relationship between the Byzantine Empire and Western Europe. These religious wars, intended to recapture the Holy Land from Muslim control, created both opportunities and catastrophic threats for Byzantium, ultimately contributing to the empire's gradual decline. The First Crusade emerged from a complex set of circumstances that included Byzantine appeals for military assistance. Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, facing pressure from the Seljuk Turks, who had conquered much of Asia Minor after their victory at Manzikert in 1071 AD, sent envoys to Pope Urban II, requesting mercenary troops to help reclaim lost territories. Urban's response exceeded anything Alexios had envisioned. At the Council of Clermont in November 1095, the Pope called for a holy war to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim rule. He promised spiritual rewards including complete remission of sins for those who took the cross. The response was overwhelming, as thousands of nobles, knights, and commoners across Western Europe pledged to join the expedition. The Byzantine emperor faced an immediate dilemma when the first crusading armies began arriving in Constantinople in 1096 AD. These forces were far larger than the mercenary bands he had requested, and their goals differed significantly from his strategic objectives. Alexios wanted to recover lost Byzantine territories in Asia Minor, while the Crusaders aimed to conquer Jerusalem and establish independent kingdoms in the Holy Land. The People's Crusade, led by Peter the Hermit, arrived first and created significant problems for Byzantine authorities. This disorganized mass of peasants, minor nobles, and adventurers lacked proper military leadership and supplies. They pillaged the countryside around Constantinople while waiting to cross into Asia Minor. Many were killed by Turkish forces shortly after crossing the Bosphorus. The main crusading armies that arrived later in 1096 and 1097 presented different but equally challenging problems. Led by powerful nobles like Bohemond of Taranto, Raymond of Toulouse, and Godfrey of Bouillon, these forces possessed formidable military capabilities but questionable loyalty to Byzantine interests. Alexios required them to swear oaths of allegiance and promise to return captured territories to the empire. The early stages of the First Crusade proceeded more successfully than anyone had anticipated. The combined Byzantine and Crusader forces recaptured Nicaea in 1097 AD, restoring this important city to imperial control. However, tensions quickly emerged over the distribution of conquered territories. When the Crusaders captured Antioch in 1098 AD, Bohemond claimed it for himself rather than returning it to Byzantium as his oath had required. The Crusader capture of Jerusalem in July 1099 AD achieved the expedition's primary objective, but created new problems for Byzantine diplomacy. The establishment of the Crusader states, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Edessa, and the County of Tripoli, created a buffer between Byzantium and the Muslim powers, but also introduced new competitors for influence in the Eastern Mediterranean. Relations between Byzantium and the Crusader states remained complex and often antagonistic throughout the 12th century. The Crusaders controlled territories that Byzantium claimed by right of previous possession. Byzantine emperors like John II Komnenos and Manuel I Komnenos launched military campaigns to assert their authority over Antioch and other former imperial territories. The Second Crusade of 1147 to 1149 AD created additional strains in Byzantine-Western relations. Emperor Manuel I allowed the crusading armies of Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany to pass through his territories, but provided limited assistance. Many crusaders blamed Byzantine duplicity for their subsequent defeats in Asia Minor, though the emperor's caution reflected reasonable concern about Western intentions. Manuel I pursued an ambitious policy of restoring Byzantine influence in Italy and the Western Mediterranean during the mid-12th century. His armies invaded southern Italy and established a foothold in the region, while his diplomats negotiated with the Pope and various Italian city-states. These Western adventures required enormous resources and diverted attention from more pressing threats in the East. The emperor's marriage to Maria of Antioch, a Latin princess, symbolized his pro-Western orientation, but created resentment among Byzantine nobles who viewed the policy as a betrayal of traditional values. Manuel's court adopted Western customs and welcomed Latin scholars and theologians, leading to accusations that he was undermining Orthodox Christianity. The Battle of Myriokephalon in 1176 AD marked the end of Manuel's ambitious policies and dealt a severe blow to Byzantine prestige. The emperor had launched a major campaign to reconquer the Seljuk capital of Konya, but his army was ambushed and destroyed in the mountain passes of Asia Minor. This defeat permanently ended Byzantine hopes of recovering central Anatolia and left the empire's eastern frontier vulnerable to Turkish raids. The Third Crusade of 1189 to 1192 AD created the most serious crisis yet in Byzantine Crusader relations. Emperor Isaac II Angelos faced simultaneous pressure from the armies of Frederick Barbarossa, Philip Augustus, and Richard the Lionheart, all of whom distrusted Byzantine motives. Frederick's large German army posed a particular threat as it marched overland through the Balkans toward Constantinople. Negotiations between Isaac II and Frederick nearly broke down completely when the Byzantine emperor secretly contacted Saladin, the Muslim leader who had recaptured Jerusalem. This diplomatic contact, though aimed at protecting Byzantine interests, convinced many crusaders that Byzantium was actively collaborating with their enemies. Only Frederick's accidental death in Asia Minor prevented a direct assault on Constantinople. The Fourth Crusade of 1204 AD represented the ultimate catastrophe in Byzantine-Western relations. Originally intended to attack Muslim Egypt, the crusade was diverted to Constantinople through a complex series of political and financial manipulations involving Venetian merchants and exiled Byzantine nobles. The result was the most devastating assault on a Christian city in medieval history. The Siege of Constantinople began in April 1204 AD, when the Crusader fleet anchored in the Golden Horn. The city's massive walls, which had protected it for over 8 centuries, were breached by Western siege engines and naval assault. For 3 days, Crusader armies looted the greatest city in Christendom, carrying away treasures accumulated over nearly 9 centuries. Contemporary accounts describe the systematic destruction of Byzantine civilization during the sack. Libraries containing irreplaceable manuscripts were burned. Churches were stripped of their precious ornaments. The great bronze horses that adorned the Hippodrome were shipped to Venice, where they still stand on the facade of St. Mark's Cathedral. Countless works of art were destroyed or melted down for their precious metals. The establishment of the Latin Empire of Constantinople marked the temporary end of Byzantine independence. Baldwin of Flanders was crowned emperor in Hagia Sophia, while Western nobles divided former Byzantine territories among themselves. Venice gained control of key commercial ports, while various Crusader lords established feudal principalities throughout Greece and Asia Minor. However, Byzantine resistance continued in several successor states that maintained the empire's traditions and claims. The Empire of Nicaea, established by Theodore I Lascaris in Western Asia Minor, became the primary center of Byzantine continuity. The Despotate of Epirus controlled much of northwestern Greece, while the Empire of Trebizond maintained independence on the Black Sea coast. The Latin Empire proved unstable and short-lived due to constant warfare with Byzantine successor states and Bulgarian forces. Western colonists never successfully integrated with the Greek population, while the feudal system imported from Western Europe proved ill-suited to Eastern conditions. The empire's financial resources were insufficient to maintain effective military forces against multiple enemies. Michael I Palaiologos of Nicaea recaptured Constantinople in 1261 AD, ending the Latin Empire after just 57 years. His forces entered the city through a poorly guarded gate and quickly overwhelmed the Latin garrison. The restoration of Byzantine rule was celebrated throughout the Orthodox world as a triumph of true Christianity over Western heresy. The restored Byzantine Empire faced enormous challenges in rebuilding. After the catastrophe of 1204, the population of Constantinople had fallen dramatically during the Latin occupation. Much of the empire's wealth had been carried away by Western looters or spent on unsuccessful military campaigns. The administrative system that had governed the empire for centuries required complete reconstruction. The relationship between Byzantium and the West never fully recovered from the trauma of the Fourth Crusade. While diplomatic relations continued and occasional military cooperation occurred, the fundamental trust necessary for alliance had been permanently damaged. Many Byzantines viewed all Westerners as potential enemies who could not be trusted to respect Orthodox Christianity or Byzantine sovereignty. The later Crusades of the 13th and 14th centuries proceeded with minimal Byzantine involvement. The empire lacked the resources to support major military expeditions, while its rulers focused on defending remaining territories against Ottoman expansion. The crusading ideal, which had once united Eastern and Western Christianity against common enemies, had become a source of division rather than cooperation. The legacy of the Crusades in Byzantine history was ultimately destructive, despite some temporary benefits. While the First Crusade had helped recover some lost territories, the overall impact weakened the empire and exposed it to Western aggression. The Fourth Crusade inflicted damage from which Byzantium never fully recovered, hastening the empire's eventual fall to the Ottomans. The rise of the Ottoman Empire. The rise of the Ottoman Empire in the 13th and 14th centuries posed the ultimate existential threat to Byzantine survival. This new Turkish power, emerging from the chaos of Seljuk decline, would gradually conquer all Byzantine territories, except Constantinople itself, setting the stage for the empire's final centuries as a besieged city-state. The Ottomans originated as one of many Turkish beyliks, or small principalities that emerged in western Anatolia after the collapse of Seljuk power in the late 13th century. Their founder, Osman I, ruled a small territory near the Byzantine frontier where his followers could launch raids against Christian settlements while avoiding conflict with more powerful Turkish neighbors. Osman's strategic position on the Byzantine frontier provided crucial advantages for his emerging state. His warriors could gain experience and wealth through raids while attracting recruits from other Turkish groups seeking opportunities for advancement. The weakness of Byzantine defenses in Anatolia after the disasters of the 13th century made these raids highly profitable with minimal risk. The early Ottoman state combined traditional Turkish military practices with administrative innovations borrowed from Byzantine and Islamic sources. Osman and his successors attracted followers through their reputation for military success and just governance. Unlike many contemporary Turkish leaders who ruled through force alone, the Ottomans developed institutions that could incorporate conquered populations and diverse ethnic groups. The reign of Osman's son Orhan, from 1326 to 1362 AD, marked the transformation of the Ottomans from a raiding band into a territorial state. Orhan captured the important Byzantine city of Bursa in 1326, making it his capital and demonstrating Ottoman capability to conduct complex siege warfare. This victory provided the Ottomans with their first major urban center and access to extensive agricultural territories. Orhan's most significant innovation was the creation of the Janissary Corps, an elite infantry force recruited from Christian boys through the Devshirme system. These youths were converted to Islam, given extensive military training, and formed into disciplined units that combined firearms with traditional weapons. The Janissaries provided the Ottomans with military advantages that their Turkish and Christian enemies could not match. The Ottoman expansion into Europe began during Orhan's reign, when his forces crossed the Dardanelles to assist the Byzantine Emperor John VI, Kantakuzenas, in a civil war. This intervention gave the Ottomans their first permanent foothold in Europe at Gallipoli in 1354 AD. From this base, they could launch further conquests into the wealthy Balkan territories. Orhan's son Murad I, who ruled from 1362 to 1389 AD, accelerated Ottoman expansion in both Asia and Europe. His forces conquered Adrianople in 1369, giving the Ottomans control of a major Balkan city and establishing a European capital. The capture of this strategic center allowed Ottoman armies to dominate the main routes between Constantinople and the Danube. The Battle of Kosovo in 1389 AD demonstrated the extent of Ottoman power and the decline of Christian resistance in the Balkans. Murad's army defeated a coalition of Serbian, Bosnian, and Albanian forces led by Prince Lazar of Serbia. Though Murad was killed during the battle, his son Bayezid I continued the campaign and established Ottoman dominance over most of the Balkan Peninsula. The early Ottoman success resulted from several factors that their Christian enemies could not easily counter. The devshirme system provided a constant supply of highly trained soldiers who owed complete loyalty to the Sultan. Ottoman administration incorporated local elites who were willing to serve the new regime, reducing resistance to Turkish rule. The empire's multi-ethnic character allowed it to draw on diverse human resources. Religious tolerance also contributed to Ottoman expansion. While conquered populations were encouraged to convert to Islam, forced conversion was relatively rare. Christians and Jews could maintain their religious practices under the millet system, which granted autonomy to religious communities. This policy reduced the motivation for religious warfare that had characterized many medieval conflicts. The Ottoman military system combined traditional Turkish cavalry with innovative infantry tactics and siege warfare. The Janissaries were trained to use firearms effectively, giving Ottoman forces significant advantages over enemies who relied primarily on traditional weapons. Ottoman engineers became experts in mining and artillery, allowing them to capture fortified cities that had previously been impregnable. Economic factors also favored Ottoman expansion. The empire controlled crucial trade routes between Europe and Asia, generating substantial revenues through customs duties. Ottoman agricultural policies increased productivity in conquered territories, while the devshirme system provided skilled administrators to manage the complex imperial bureaucracy. The reign of Bayezid I, from 1389 to 1402 AD, brought the Ottomans to the verge of conquering Constantinople and eliminating the Byzantine Empire entirely. Bayezid's forces overran most remaining Byzantine territories in Anatolia, while his European armies advanced toward Hungary. By 1400 AD, the Byzantine Empire consisted of little more than Constantinople and a few scattered enclaves. The first siege of Constantinople by Ottoman forces occurred in 1394 through Buonvard, 4 AD, during Bayezid's reign. The Sultan's armies surrounded the city while his fleet blockaded the Golden Horn. For 8 years, the Byzantines endured constant pressure as Ottoman forces tightened their grip on the imperial capital. The siege might have succeeded had not external events intervened to save the city. The invasion of Anatolia by Tamerlane in 1402 AD temporarily saved the Byzantine Empire from conquest. The great Mongol conqueror defeated Bayezid at the Battle of Ankara, capturing the Ottoman Sultan and throwing the empire into civil war. This respite allowed the Byzantines to recover some strength while the Ottomans fought among themselves for succession rights. The Ottoman Civil War lasted from 1402 to 1413 AD as Bayezid's sons struggled for control of their father's territories. Mehmed IV eventually emerged victorious and began the process of reuniting the Ottoman domains. However, the decade of internal warfare had allowed the empire's enemies to recover lost territories and strengthen their defenses. The restoration of Ottoman unity under Murad II from 1421 to 1451 AD renewed the pressure on Byzantine territories. Murad's forces reconquered most of the territories lost during the Civil War, while launching new attacks against Christian strongholds. The Second Siege of Constantinople in 1422 AD demonstrated that the Ottomans remained determined to capture the Byzantine capital. The development of Ottoman artillery during the 15th century provided the technological means to breach Constantinople's massive walls. Hungarian engineer Orban designed enormous cannons capable of destroying the fortifications that had protected the city for over 1,000 years. These weapons would prove decisive in the final siege that ended Byzantine independence. By 1450 AD, the Ottoman Empire had become the dominant power in southeastern Europe and Western Asia. Only Constantinople and a few scattered territories remained under Byzantine control. The stage was set for the final confrontation that would determine whether the last remnant of the Roman Empire would survive or disappear from history. The rise of the Ottomans represented more than just another conquest in the turbulent history of the Eastern Mediterranean. It marked the emergence of a new type of Islamic state that combined Turkish military traditions with Byzantine administrative practices and Islamic religious authority. This synthesis created an empire that would dominate much of the former Byzantine world for over 4 centuries. The Palaiologos dynasty and final decline. The Palaiologos dynasty, which ruled the Byzantine Empire from 1261 to 1453 AD, presided over both the restoration of Byzantine independence and its final decline. These last emperors struggled heroically to preserve their empire against overwhelming odds, but ultimately could not overcome the accumulated effects of centuries of territorial loss, economic decline, and demographic collapse. Michael VIII, Palaiologos, founded the dynasty when he recaptured Constantinople from the Latin Empire in 1261 AD. As Emperor of Nicaea, he had spent years planning the restoration while building alliances with Genoa and other Western powers willing to oppose Venetian dominance in the Eastern Mediterranean. His successful assault on Constantinople seemed to herald a new age of Byzantine revival. The restored empire faced immense challenges that would define the remaining 2 centuries of Byzantine history. Constantinople had suffered severe population decline during the Latin occupation, with many neighborhoods reduced to ruins. The imperial treasury was empty, while the administrative system required complete reconstruction. Most former Byzantine territories remained under Latin or Turkish control. Michael VIII's reign was marked by constant warfare on multiple fronts as he attempted to defend and expand his restored empire. His forces fought against the remnants of the Latin Empire in Greece while simultaneously confronting Turkish expansion in Anatolia. The emperor also faced opposition from Orthodox populations, who viewed his negotiations with the Pope as betrayal of traditional Byzantine Christianity. The Union of the Churches, proclaimed at the Second Council of Lyon in 1274 AD, represented Michael's most controversial policy. In exchange for Western military support against Turkish and Latin enemies, the emperor agreed to acknowledge papal supremacy and accept Catholic doctrine on disputed theological issues. This union provoked widespread resistance from Byzantine clergy and people who viewed it as apostasy. The union ultimately failed to provide the promised Western support, while creating lasting divisions within Byzantine society. Many bishops were deposed for refusing to accept the union, while popular unrest erupted in several cities. When Michael died in 1282 AD, his son Andronicus II immediately repudiated the union and restored traditional Orthodox practices. Andronicus II ruled for nearly 5 decades from 1282 to 1328 AD, making him one of the longest reigning Byzantine emperors. His reign was characterized by defensive policies aimed at preserving what remained of the empire, rather than attempting ambitious reconquests. The emperor reduced military spending while relying increasingly on Genoese and other foreign mercenaries for defense. The civil war between Andronicus II and his grandson Andronicus III, from 1321 to 1328 AD, further weakened the empire at a crucial moment when Turkish pressure was intensifying. This conflict divided imperial resources and allowed Turkish raiders to devastate remaining Byzantine territories in Anatolia. The war ended with the younger Andronicus gaining the throne, but the damage to imperial prestige and resources proved irreversible. John VI, Cantacuzanos's usurpation, and the subsequent civil war from 1341 to 1347 brought the empire to the brink of complete collapse. Cantacuzanos claimed the throne after the death of Andronicus III, opposing the legitimate heir John V Palaiologos, who was still a minor. The conflict lasted 6 years and resulted in massive destruction throughout the remaining imperial territories. The intervention of Stefan Dušan's Serbian Empire and rising Ottoman power during this civil war demonstrated the extent of Byzantine weakness. Both sides in the conflict sought foreign allies, allowing Serbian and Turkish forces to establish permanent footholds in Byzantine territory. When the war finally ended with John V's victory, the empire controlled little more than Constantinople and its immediate surroundings. The Black Death struck the Byzantine Empire repeatedly during the 14th century, further reducing its already depleted population. Constantinople, which had once housed over 500,000 inhabitants, probably contained fewer than 100,000 people by 1400 AD. Rural areas were similarly depopulated as plague, warfare, and economic collapse drove survivors to seek refuge elsewhere. Economic decline accompanied demographic collapse, as the empire lost most of its productive territories to Turkish conquest. The remaining Byzantine lands could not generate sufficient tax revenue to maintain effective military forces or administrative systems. The emperors became increasingly dependent on subsidies from Genoa, Venice, and other Western powers that viewed Byzantium as a useful buffer against Ottoman expansion. John V Palaiologos, who ruled from 1341 to 1391 AD with several interruptions, epitomized the desperate situation of the late Byzantine Empire. He traveled personally to Western Europe, seeking military aid, even converting to Catholicism in 1369 AD to gain papal support. These humiliating expeditions produced minimal results, while undermining imperial prestige among Orthodox subjects. The emperor's acceptance of Ottoman suzerainty in 1373 AD marked a new low in Byzantine history. John V agreed to pay tribute to Sultan Murad I and provide military assistance for Ottoman campaigns. This arrangement allowed the empire to survive but reduced the Byzantine emperor to the status of an Ottoman vassal, undermining the theoretical foundations of imperial authority. Manuel II Palaiologos, who ruled from 1391 to 1425 AD, made the last serious attempt to restore Byzantine independence through Western alliance. He traveled extensively throughout Europe, seeking support for a new crusade against the Ottomans. His diplomatic efforts culminated in the Crusade of Nicopolis in 1396, but the decisive Ottoman victory ended Western enthusiasm for major expeditions to the east. The Siege of Constantinople from 1394 to 1402 AD demonstrated both the empire's weakness and its remarkable resilience. Bayezid I's forces completely surrounded the city and maintained a blockade for 8 years. The Byzantines survived through Western naval assistance and their own determination, but the siege reduced them to near starvation and highlighted their complete dependence on foreign aid. Tamerlane's invasion of Anatolia in 1402 AD provided temporary relief from Ottoman pressure, but also revealed the empire's inability to take advantage of favorable circumstances. While the Ottomans fought a civil war following Bayezid's defeat, the Byzantines lacked the resources to recover lost territories or strengthen their defenses significantly. John VIII Palaiologos, who ruled from 1425 to 1448 AD, made the final attempt to gain Western support through church union. The Council of Florence in 1439 AD achieved a theoretical reunion between Eastern and Western Christianity, but popular opposition in Constantinople prevented its implementation. The emperor's pro-union policies created additional divisions within an already fragmented society. The reign of Constantine XI Palaiologos, from 1449 to 1453 AD, marked the end of both the dynasty and the empire. Constantine was a capable ruler who attempted various reforms to strengthen Constantinople's defenses, but he faced impossible odds. The massive Ottoman army assembled by Mehmed II for the final siege was far larger than anything previous sultans had deployed against the city. The last emperors of Byzantium demonstrated remarkable personal courage in defending their diminished realm. They led troops in battle, negotiated tirelessly with potential allies, and maintained imperial dignity despite overwhelming adversity. However, their individual qualities could not overcome the structural problems that had reduced the empire to a shadow of its former greatness. The Palaiologos period witnessed significant cultural achievements despite political decline. Artists, scholars, and theologians produced works of lasting value while maintaining connections with Western Renaissance humanism. The preservation and transmission of classical Greek learning during this period contributed to the European Renaissance and ensured the survival of ancient knowledge. The final decades of Byzantine history illustrate both the resilience of imperial traditions and the limitations of political willpower in the face of overwhelming material disadvantages. The last emperors preserved the theoretical continuity of the Roman Empire for nearly 2 additional centuries, but they could not reverse the demographic, economic, and military decline that made their empire's eventual fall inevitable. The fall of Constantinople. The fall of Constantinople on May 29, 253 AD marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and concluded over 1,000 years of Roman rule in the East. This final siege, conducted by Sultan Mehmed II with unprecedented resources and innovative military technology, overcame the massive fortifications that had protected the city for over 8 centuries. Constantine XI Palaiologos became emperor in January 1449 AD, inheriting an empire that consisted of little more than Constantinople and a few scattered territories. The new emperor recognized that his primary task was preparing the city for the inevitable Ottoman assault. He strengthened fortifications, recruited soldiers, and sought Western assistance, though his resources remained woefully inadequate for the challenge ahead. Mehmed II, who became Ottoman Sultan in 1451 AD at the age of 19, was determined to complete the conquest that had eluded his predecessors. Unlike previous Ottoman rulers who had treated Constantinople as one objective among many, Mehmed made the city's capture his primary goal. He spent 2 years preparing for a siege that would be larger and more sophisticated than any previous Ottoman military operation. The young sultan's preparations began with neutralizing potential Byzantine allies and securing his flanks. Ottoman forces captured the remaining Byzantine territories in the Black Sea and Aegean regions, eliminating possible bases for relief expeditions. Mehmed also concluded treaties with potential enemies like Hungary and Venice, ensuring that the Ottomans could concentrate their full resources against Constantinople. The construction of Rumeli Hisari, the fortress on the European shore of the Bosphorus, demonstrated Mehmed's innovative approach to siege warfare. Completed in 1452 AD, this fortress combined with the existing Anadolu Hisari on the Asian shore to give the Ottomans complete control over the Bosphorus. No ships could reach Constantinople without Ottoman permission, eliminating the city's traditional advantage of maritime supply lines. The Ottoman army that assembled outside Constantinople in April 1453 was the largest force ever deployed against the city. Contemporary estimates suggest between 150,000 and 200,000 soldiers, including elite janissary units, irregular raiders, and construction workers for siege equipment. This massive force was supported by a fleet of over 120 ships that blockaded the Golden Horn and Sea of Marmara. The defenders of Constantinople numbered perhaps 7,000 men, including Byzantine soldiers, Genoese volunteers, and other foreign allies. Emperor Constantine had attempted to recruit additional forces from Western Europe, but the response was minimal. The city's population had dwindled to roughly 50,000 inhabitants, far too few to man the extensive fortifications effectively. The most significant innovation in Mehmed's siege was the deployment of massive cannons designed by the Hungarian engineer Orban. The largest of these weapons, nicknamed Basilica, could fire stone cannonballs weighing over 600 pounds. These enormous guns were capable of breaching the Theodosian walls that had protected Constantinople since the 5th century AD. The siege began on April 6, 1453 AD, when Ottoman forces completely surrounded the city by land and sea. The massive cannons began their bombardment of the walls, while other Ottoman units constructed earthworks and siege towers. The defenders responded with their own artillery, but their smaller guns were no match for the Ottoman weapons. The most dramatic moment of the siege occurred when Mehmed's engineers transported ships overland into the Golden Horn. The Byzantines had stretched a great chain across the harbor's mouth to prevent Ottoman vessels from entering this crucial waterway. Mehmed's solution was to construct a wooden roadway over the hills of Pera and drag over 70 ships into the Golden Horn during a single night. This engineering feat shocked the defenders and demonstrated the extent of Ottoman resources and determination. The appearance of Ottoman ships in what had been thought a secure harbor forced the Byzantines to extend their defenses along the Golden Horn Wall, further stretching their limited manpower. Several attempts were made to break the siege through negotiation or external assistance. Constantine rejected Ottoman surrender terms that would have allowed him to rule a reduced territory as Mehmed's vassal. Venetian and Genoese merchants in the city sent urgent appeals for naval assistance, but no relief fleet arrived in time to affect the siege's outcome. The final assault began before dawn on May 29, 1453 AD, after 53 days of siege. Mehmed launched successive waves of attacks to exhaust the defenders before sending in his elite Janissary Corps for the decisive blow. The first attacks by irregular troops and provincial forces were repulsed with heavy losses, but they achieved their objective of wearing down Byzantine resistance. The crucial breakthrough came when Ottoman forces discovered that a small gate, called the Kirkoporta, had been left unlocked after a nighttime sortie. A group of Janissaries entered the city through this opening and attacked the defenders from behind. Simultaneously, other Ottoman units scaled the damaged walls using ladders and siege towers. Emperor Constantine XI died fighting on the walls during the final assault. According to various accounts, he removed his imperial regalia and fought as an ordinary soldier, preferring death to capture. His body was found among the other dead after the battle, identified by the purple boots worn only by emperors. The sack of Constantinople lasted 3 days as Ottoman soldiers looted the city, according to traditional Islamic law. Churches were stripped of their treasures, while private homes were ransacked for valuables. Many inhabitants were enslaved, while others fled to Ottoman-controlled territories or Western Europe. The great library collections that had preserved classical learning for centuries were largely destroyed or scattered. Hagia Sophia, the greatest symbol of Byzantine Christianity, was converted into a mosque on the Friday following the conquest. Sultan Mehmed personally entered the cathedral and ordered that it be adapted for Islamic worship. The Christian mosaics were covered with plaster, while a minbar and mihrab were installed to indicate the direction of Mecca. The immediate aftermath of the conquest saw significant changes in the city's character and population. Mehmed encouraged migration to Constantinople from throughout the Ottoman Empire, bringing Muslim, Christian, and Jewish settlers to repopulate the depleted city. Within a generation, Constantinople had recovered much of its former size and prosperity, though under Turkish rather than Greek leadership. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves throughout Europe and the Islamic world. Western Christians mourned the loss of the last remnant of the Roman Empire, while Muslims celebrated the conquest of a city that had long symbolized Christian resistance to Islamic expansion. The event marked the definitive end of the medieval period and the beginning of a new phase in Eastern Mediterranean history. Many Byzantine scholars fled to Western Europe following the city's fall, bringing with them precious manuscripts and knowledge of classical Greek literature and philosophy. This migration of scholars contributed significantly to the European Renaissance, as Western humanists gained access to texts and traditions that had been preserved in Byzantine libraries. The conquest also had profound implications for Orthodox Christianity, which lost its traditional center in Constantinople. While the Orthodox Church continued to function under Ottoman rule, the fall of the last Christian empire in the East forced a fundamental reorganization of Orthodox ecclesiastical and political relationships. Sultan Mehmed II, now known as the Conqueror, had achieved his goal of completing the Ottoman conquest of Byzantine territories. At the age of 21, he had succeeded where many of his predecessors had failed. The capture of Constantinople provided the Ottomans with a magnificent capital worthy of their expanding empire, and completed their transformation from a frontier principality into a major world power. The last Byzantine Empire ended not with gradual decay, but with a final dramatic siege that captured the attention of the entire medieval world. The courage of the defenders and the determination of their enemies provided a fitting conclusion to over 11 centuries of Byzantine history. Byzantine culture and legacy. The cultural achievements of the Byzantine Empire represent one of history's most remarkable intellectual and artistic legacies. For over 11 centuries, Byzantine scholars, artists, theologians, and craftsmen created works of enduring beauty and significance that profoundly influenced European, Islamic, and Orthodox Christian civilizations. Byzantine culture emerged from the fusion of three great traditions: classical Greek learning, Roman administrative practices, and Christian spiritual values. This synthesis created a unique civilization that preserved ancient knowledge while developing new forms of artistic expression and intellectual inquiry. The empire served as a bridge between the ancient and medieval worlds, transmitting classical learning to future generations while creating distinctive cultural achievements. The preservation of classical Greek literature was perhaps Byzantium's most important cultural contribution. While Western Europe largely lost access to Greek texts during the early medieval period, Byzantine scholars continued to copy, study, and transmit the works of Homer, Plato, Aristotle, and other ancient authors. The Imperial Library in Constantinople housed one of the world's greatest collections of classical manuscripts. The Macedonian Renaissance of the 10th and 11th centuries marked the high point of Byzantine intellectual achievement. Scholars like Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus compiled encyclopedic works on statecraft, ceremonial protocol, and imperial history. The Palatine School in Constantinople attracted students from throughout the Orthodox world, creating a network of learned men who carried Byzantine intellectual traditions to distant regions. Byzantine scholars made significant original contributions to fields including theology, philosophy, history, and science. Writers like Procopius provided detailed accounts of contemporary events, while theologians such as John of Damascus developed sophisticated philosophical systems that influenced both Eastern and Western Christianity. Scientists and mathematicians working in Constantinople maintained contact with Islamic scholars, facilitating the exchange of knowledge between Christian and Muslim worlds. The development of Greek minuscule script during the 9th century revolutionized manuscript production and increased the accessibility of written texts. This new writing system was more compact and legible than previous scripts, allowing scribes to produce books more efficiently. The proliferation of manuscripts during this period ensured the survival of classical works that might otherwise have been lost forever. Byzantine art evolved through several distinct phases, each reflecting contemporary theological, political, and aesthetic concerns. The iconoclastic period, from 726 to 843 AD, temporarily interrupted the development of religious art, but the subsequent revival produced some of history's most magnificent church decorations. The mosaics and frescoes of this period demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of both classical artistic principles and Christian symbolic meaning. The development of the Byzantine icon represented a unique contribution to Christian art. These sacred images were not merely decorative objects, but theological statements about the nature of divine incarnation. The sophisticated theological arguments developed to defend icon veneration during the iconoclastic crisis established principles that continue to influence Orthodox Christian thought about the relationship between material and spiritual realms. Architectural achievements paralleled artistic development, as Byzantine builders created structures that combined engineering innovation with spiritual symbolism. The reconstruction of Hagia Sophia under Justinian established architectural principles that influenced church design throughout the Orthodox world. The central dome supported by pendentives became the defining characteristic of Byzantine ecclesiastical architecture. Monastery construction flourished throughout the empire as monastic communities became centers of learning, artistic production, and spiritual life. The monasteries of Mount Athos, established in the 10th century, developed into one of Orthodox Christianity's most important intellectual centers. These communities preserved manuscripts, trained scholars, and maintained the spiritual traditions that defined Orthodox identity. Byzantine music evolved sophisticated forms that influenced both secular and sacred musical development. The tradition of Byzantine chant, with its complex modal systems and melodic structures, created a distinctive musical language that enhanced liturgical worship. These musical innovations spread throughout the Orthodox world and influenced musical development in regions as distant as Russia and the Balkans. Educational institutions in the Byzantine Empire maintained higher standards of literacy and learning than most contemporary European societies. The University of Constantinople, refounded in the 9th century, provided advanced instruction in philosophy, theology, law, and medicine. Provincial schools trained administrators and clergy, while maintaining connections with the capital's intellectual life. Legal scholarship represented another area of significant Byzantine achievement. The preservation and development of Roman legal principles through compilations like Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis influenced legal systems throughout Europe. Byzantine legal scholars continued to refine and adapt these principles to contemporary conditions, creating legal traditions that survived the empire's political collapse. The role of women in Byzantine culture was more complex and varied than in many contemporary societies. While formal political power remained largely male-dominated, women could wield significant influence through religious institutions, court connections, and cultural patronage. Empresses like Irene and Theodora shaped imperial policy, while female monastics preserved and transmitted intellectual traditions. Theological development within Byzantine Christianity created distinctive doctrinal and spiritual traditions that differentiated orthodoxy from Western Christianity. The emphasis on theosis or deification as the goal of Christian life, the development of hesychasm as a mystical practice, and the sophisticated theological arguments about the nature of divine energies all represented original Byzantine contributions to Christian thought. The influence of Byzantine culture extended far beyond the empire's political boundaries. Orthodox churches throughout Eastern Europe, the Balkans, and Russia adopted Byzantine liturgical practices, artistic styles, and theological principles. The Cyrillic alphabet, developed by Byzantine missionaries, enabled the creation of written literatures in Slavic languages. Trade connections carried Byzantine cultural influences to distant regions, including Italy, the Islamic world, and even Western Europe. Venetian merchants brought Byzantine artistic styles to their home city, while Islamic scholars studied Greek philosophical texts preserved in Byzantine libraries. The empire's position at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa facilitated these cultural exchanges. The final centuries of Byzantine history witnessed a remarkable cultural renaissance despite political decline. Scholars like Gemistos Plethon promoted Neoplatonic philosophy, while artists created works of extraordinary beauty in churches throughout the remaining imperial territories. This late Byzantine cultural flowering demonstrated the empire's continued intellectual vitality, even as its political power waned. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 dispersed Byzantine scholars throughout Europe, contributing significantly to the Renaissance movement. These emigrant intellectuals brought with them manuscripts, knowledge, and scholarly traditions that had been preserved in Byzantine libraries for centuries. Their arrival in Western universities provided European humanists with access to Greek texts and philosophical traditions that had been largely unknown in the West. The preservation of ancient Greek learning represents Byzantium's most enduring contribution to world civilization. Without the efforts of Byzantine scribes and scholars who copied and preserved classical texts through the medieval centuries, much of ancient Greek literature, philosophy, and science would have been permanently lost. Works by Plato, Aristotle, Sophocles, and countless other ancient authors survived only because Byzantine scholars valued and preserved them. Byzantine artistic influence extended far beyond the empire's collapse. The iconographic traditions developed in Byzantine workshops influenced artistic development in Russia, the Balkans, and other Orthodox regions for centuries after 1453. Renaissance artists in Italy studied Byzantine techniques and incorporated elements of Eastern artistic traditions into their own work. The liturgical and theological traditions of Byzantine Christianity continue to shape Orthodox worship and thought in the present day. The Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, developed during the Byzantine period, remains the central worship service of Orthodox churches worldwide. The theological principles established by Byzantine theologians continue to influence Orthodox doctrine and spiritual practices. Modern scholars recognize that Byzantine civilization was not merely a continuation of ancient Rome, but a distinctive culture that made original contributions to human knowledge and artistic achievement. The empire's role in preserving classical learning, developing new theological and philosophical ideas, and creating magnificent works of art ensures its continued relevance to contemporary scholarship and cultural appreciation. The legacy of Byzantine culture thus extends far beyond the empire's political history. In art, literature, theology, law, and scholarship, Byzantine achievements continue to influence human civilization more than 5 centuries after the empire's fall. This cultural legacy represents the ultimate triumph of Byzantine civilization over the political and military forces that destroyed its territorial power. The Byzantine administrative system of the Byzantine Empire represented one of the most sophisticated governmental structures of the medieval world, evolving from Roman precedents while adapting to changing circumstances over 11 centuries. This complex bureaucracy enabled a relatively small population to govern vast territories and diverse peoples across 3 continents. The foundations of Byzantine administration lay in the late Roman system established by Diocletian and Constantine in the 4th century. However, the Eastern Empire's administrators gradually modified these structures to meet the unique challenges of governing territories that stretched from the Danube to the Euphrates and from the Crimea to Crete. The emperor stood at the apex of the administrative hierarchy as an absolute ruler whose authority derived from divine appointment. Byzantine political theory held that the emperor was God's representative on earth, responsible for maintaining justice and defending Orthodox Christianity. This sacred character of imperial authority provided legitimacy for the complex governmental system that operated in the emperor's name. The imperial court in Constantinople developed elaborate ceremonial protocols that reinforced the emperor's sacred status while providing a framework for governmental decision-making. These ceremonies, described in detail in works like Constantine VII's Book of Ceremonies, were not merely decorative displays, but functional elements of the administrative system that regulated access to the emperor and structured political relationships. The central administration was divided into several major departments, each headed by a logothet, or minister responsible for specific governmental functions. The logothet of the dromos supervised foreign affairs and the postal system. The logothet of the military managed army supplies and fortifications. The logothet of the treasury oversaw imperial finances and tax collection. Provincial administration evolved significantly over the centuries in response to military pressures and administrative needs. The theme system, developed during the 7th and 8th centuries, represented the most important innovation in Byzantine governmental structure. Under this system, the empire's territories were divided into themes, or military districts governed by strategos, who combined civil and military authority. Each theme was responsible for maintaining its own military forces while contributing taxes and soldiers to the imperial government. Free peasant soldiers received land grants in exchange for military service, creating a system of farmer soldiers who could defend their territories while providing for their own support. This arrangement reduced the central government's military expenses while strengthening frontier defenses. The theme system proved highly effective during the empire's most challenging period, from the 7th to 10th centuries. When Arab and Bulgar armies invaded imperial territories, local theme forces could respond quickly without waiting for orders from Constantinople. The system also reduced the risk of military rebellion by distributing armed forces among multiple commanders rather than concentrating them under a single general. Civil administration within each theme was supervised by appointed officials responsible to the central government. These administrators, drawn from the educated classes of Constantinople and other major cities, provided professional continuity and expertise that local military commanders often lacked. The balance between civilian and military authority varied over time, but both elements remained essential to effective governance. The legal system provided another crucial element of Byzantine administration. The empire's courts operated at multiple levels, from village magistrates who handled minor disputes to the imperial court that decided major cases. Professional judges, trained in Roman law as codified by Justinian, ensured consistent application of legal principles throughout the empire's diverse territories. Legal education in Constantinople produced generations of qualified administrators who served throughout the imperial bureaucracy. These men, known as logothetes after their primary qualification, formed a professional civil service that maintained governmental continuity despite frequent changes in imperial leadership. Their expertise in law, theology, and classical literature enabled them to handle the complex administrative challenges of governing a multi-ethnic empire. Tax collection represented one of the most complex aspects of Byzantine administration. The empire's revenues came from multiple sources, including land taxes, customs duties, trade monopolies, and special assessments for military campaigns. Professional tax collectors, supervised by central government auditors, were responsible for ensuring accurate assessment and collection of these various levies. The cadastral system maintained detailed records of land ownership, agricultural productivity, and tax obligations throughout the empire. These records, updated periodically through comprehensive surveys, provided the information necessary for equitable taxation and efficient resource allocation. The sophistication of this record-keeping system exceeded anything available in contemporary Western European kingdoms. Military administration required coordination between central authorities in Constantinople and local commanders in the themes. The imperial government maintained detailed registers of military units, their equipment, and their readiness status. Periodic inspections by central officials ensured that theme armies maintained proper training and discipline. The postal system, inherited from Roman precedents but adapted to Byzantine needs, facilitated communication between the capital and distant provinces. Imperial messengers carried official correspondence along established routes while also providing intelligence about local conditions and potential security threats. This communication network enabled the central government to respond quickly to developing situations throughout the empire. Diplomatic administration became increasingly important as the empire faced numerous foreign enemies and potential allies. The Bureau of Barbarians managed relationships with foreign peoples, maintaining detailed files on foreign rulers, their territories, and their political relationships. Byzantine diplomats, trained in classical rhetoric and contemporary politics, conducted negotiations that often achieved more than military campaigns. The empire's economic administration coordinated trade regulation, currency management, and industrial production. Imperial workshops produced luxury goods for export while generating revenues for the treasury. The government also regulated private trade through licensing systems and quality controls that maintained Byzantine products' reputation for excellence. Religious administration represented a crucial governmental function in a state that defined itself as a Christian commonwealth. While the church maintained its own hierarchical structure, imperial authorities coordinated with ecclesiastical leaders on matters affecting both spiritual and temporal welfare. The emperor's role as protector of Orthodox Christianity required active involvement in theological disputes and church governance. Educational administration ensured the training of future governmental officials while preserving the cultural traditions that legitimized imperial authority. The University of Constantinople, along with provincial schools, provided instruction in law, theology, philosophy, and classical literature. This educational system produced the educated administrators essential for effective governance. The flexibility of Byzantine administration enabled the empire to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining essential governmental functions. During periods of territorial expansion, new themes were created and additional administrative positions established. During times of crisis, emergency measures could be implemented while preserving the basic structure of governmental authority. Record-keeping represented a crucial element of Byzantine administrative effectiveness. Imperial archives preserved copies of laws, treaties, tax assessments, and other official documents that enabled consistent policy implementation over extended periods. These records also provided precedents for legal decisions and administrative procedures. The decline of Byzantine administrative effectiveness during the empire's final centuries reflected broader problems including territorial losses, demographic decline, and financial difficulties. However, the basic structure of imperial government continued to function until the empire's final days, demonstrating the enduring effectiveness of administrative systems developed over centuries of experience. Modern historians recognize that Byzantine administration represented one of the medieval world's most sophisticated governmental systems. Its combination of central authority with local flexibility, professional expertise with imperial authority, and administrative efficiency with political legitimacy provided a model that influenced governmental development throughout Eastern Europe and the Orthodox world. Byzantine military organization and tactics. The military organization of the Byzantine Empire evolved continuously over 11 centuries, adapting to changing enemies, available resources, and technological innovations. This military system, which defended one of history's longest-lasting empires, combined traditional Roman discipline with innovative tactics and administrative structures that enabled a relatively small state to survive among much larger enemies. The foundation of Byzantine military organization lay in the late Roman army established by Constantine and his successors. However, the Eastern Empire's military commanders gradually modified these structures to address specific challenges, including Arab expansion, Bulgar invasions, and the rise of powerful neighbors like the Holy Roman Empire and later the Ottoman Empire. The theme system, implemented during the 7th and 8th centuries, represented the most significant innovation in Byzantine military organization. Under this system, the empire's territories were divided into military districts called themes, each governed by a strategos or general who combined military and civil authority. This arrangement enabled rapid response to invasion while reducing the central government's military expenses. Each theme maintained its own army, composed primarily of farmer soldiers who received land grants in exchange for military service. These theme armies typically numbered between 4,000 and 10,000 men, depending on the strategic importance and population of their territories. The soldiers were required to provide their own equipment and training while remaining available for military service when needed. The quality of theme armies varied considerably depending on local conditions and the effectiveness of their commanders. Frontier themes, facing constant enemy pressure, maintained higher levels of readiness and combat experience than interior themes that rarely saw military action. The most elite theme forces served in regions like the Anatolikon and Armeniakon themes, which defended the crucial Asia Minor heartland. Central armies supplemented the theme forces and provided the emperor with troops under his direct control. The Scalae Palatini, imperial guard units stationed in Constantinople, served both ceremonial and military functions. These professional soldiers received regular pay from the imperial treasury and maintained higher standards of equipment and training than typical theme forces. The Tagmata, elite central army units created during the 8th century, represented the empire's most effective military forces. These professional regiments included heavy cavalry, infantry, and specialized units like engineers and archers. The Tagmata could be deployed anywhere in the empire and often provided the decisive force in major campaigns. Recruitment practices evolved to meet changing military needs and available human resources. The theme system relied primarily on hereditary military service, with sons of soldiers inheriting both land grants and military obligations. However, the central government also recruited volunteers, purchased foreign mercenaries, and occasionally conscripted civilians for specific campaigns. The empire made extensive use of foreign mercenaries, particularly during periods when theme armies were insufficient for major operations. Varangian guards from Scandinavia and Russia served as elite infantry, while Turkish, Arab, and Western European cavalry supplemented imperial forces. These mercenaries often possessed specialized skills that complemented the capabilities of native Byzantine troops. Military equipment and tactics reflected the diverse enemies and terrain that Byzantine armies encountered. Heavy cavalry, armored in mail or scale armor, and equipped with lances, swords, and bows, formed the core of most imperial armies. These cataphracts combined the shock power of Western heavy cavalry with the mobility and archery skills of Eastern horse soldiers. Infantry forces included both heavily armored spearmen, who could resist cavalry charges, and light troops armed with bows, javelins, and swords for skirmishing and pursuit. Professional engineers provided expertise in siege warfare, while specialized units like Greek fire operators gave Byzantine armies unique capabilities in naval and siege operations. Naval organization paralleled land-based military structures, with theme fleets supplementing the central imperial navy. The empire's strategic position required effective naval forces to protect Constantinople, maintain communications with distant provinces, and contest enemy control of crucial waterways like the Dardanelles and the southern Italian coast. The imperial navy maintained professional crews and specialized vessels, including dromons, fast warships, equipped with Greek fire projectors and ramming beaks. These ships could outmaneuver heavier enemy vessels while delivering devastating attacks through their unique incendiary weapons. Naval tactics emphasized speed, maneuverability, and the effective use of Greek fire against enemy fleets. Military intelligence and reconnaissance represented crucial elements of Byzantine military effectiveness. The empire maintained extensive networks of spies and informants who provided information about enemy movements, political developments, and military capabilities. This intelligence enabled Byzantine commanders to anticipate enemy actions and position their forces advantageously. Diplomatic coordination with military operations often achieved results that purely military campaigns could not accomplish. Byzantine diplomats negotiated alliances with enemy neighbors, bribed enemy commanders, and spread propaganda that weakened enemy morale. The empire's reputation for diplomatic sophistication often deterred enemies who might otherwise have risked military confrontation. Fortification represented another crucial aspect of Byzantine military organization. The empire maintained extensive networks of fortified cities, frontier fortresses, and border watchtowers that provided early warning of enemy invasions and strong points for defensive operations. Constantinople's massive walls provided the ultimate fallback position that protected the empire's heart. Logistical organization enabled Byzantine armies to operate effectively across vast distances and diverse terrain. The empire's road networks, inherited from Roman predecessors and maintained through continuous effort, facilitated rapid troop movements and supply deliveries. Professional quartermasters coordinated the complex task of feeding and equipping armies during extended campaigns. Military engineering capabilities allowed Byzantine forces to conduct sophisticated siege operations while defending their own fortifications effectively. Imperial engineers could construct siege engines, mining operations, and counter-fortifications that often proved decisive in capturing enemy strongholds or defending imperial territories. Training and discipline standards varied among different types of military units, but generally maintained higher levels than most contemporary armies. The theme system's emphasis on hereditary military service created military traditions that were passed from fathers to sons over generations. Professional units like the Tagmata maintained even stricter training regimens and disciplinary standards. Medical organization provided care for wounded soldiers and attempted to prevent disease outbreaks that could devastate armies on campaign. Military hospitals in major cities treated injured soldiers, while field medical units accompanied armies during major operations. These medical services, though primitive by modern standards, exceeded the capabilities available to most medieval armies. The decline of Byzantine military effectiveness during the empire's final centuries reflected broader problems, including territorial losses, financial difficulties, and demographic decline. However, the basic principles of Byzantine military organization continued to influence military development throughout Eastern Europe and the Orthodox world long after the empire's political collapse. Modern military historians recognize that Byzantine military organization represented one of the medieval world's most sophisticated military systems. Its combination of professional and militia forces, central coordination with local flexibility, and adaptation to diverse enemies and terrain provided a model for military organization that influenced military development throughout Europe and the Middle East. Byzantine economics and trade. The economic system of the Byzantine Empire represented one of the medieval world's most sophisticated commercial networks, connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa through trade routes that generated enormous wealth and supported one of history's longest-lasting states. This complex economy evolved continuously over 11 centuries, adapting to changing political circumstances while maintaining the commercial relationships that sustained imperial power. Constantinople's strategic location at the crossroads of Europe and Asia provided the foundation for Byzantine economic prosperity. The city controlled the only water route between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, enabling imperial authorities to regulate and tax trade between these crucial commercial regions. This geographic advantage generated steady revenues that funded imperial administration and military operations. The Bosphorus Strait served as one of medieval Europe's most important commercial choke points, through which passed goods traveling between the resource-rich regions around the Black Sea and the wealthy markets of the Mediterranean world. Byzantine customs officials collected duties on silk from China, furs from Russia, grain from Egypt, spices from India, and countless other products that passed through Constantinople's harbors. Imperial workshops in Constantinople and other major cities produced luxury goods that were exported throughout Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Byzantine silk, renowned for its quality and beauty, competed successfully with Chinese silk in international markets. Imperial goldsmiths created jewelry and religious objects that were prized by wealthy customers from Scandinavia to Ethiopia. The famous purple dye, produced from murex shells found in the eastern Mediterranean, remained a closely guarded imperial monopoly for centuries. This luxury product, reserved primarily for imperial use and high-ranking officials, symbolized Byzantine wealth and technological sophistication while generating substantial revenues through limited exports to foreign courts. Greek fire, the incendiary weapon that gave Byzantine naval forces crucial advantages over their enemies, represented another example of the empire's technological and economic capabilities. The formula for this weapon remained a closely guarded state secret, demonstrating the government's ability to control valuable technologies while maintaining military advantages over potential enemies. Agricultural production in the empire's various provinces provided the foundation for both subsistence and commercial activities. Egypt, until its loss to Arab conquest in 641 AD, supplied grain that fed Constantinople and generated enormous tax revenues. After losing Egypt, the empire relied increasingly on agricultural production in Asia Minor, the Balkans, and other remaining territories. The free peasantry that formed the backbone of the theme system also contributed significantly to agricultural production and tax revenues. These farmer soldiers cultivated their land grants while remaining available for military service, creating an economic system that supported both agricultural production and military defense. This arrangement reduced the government's expenses while maintaining productive use of imperial territories. Urban commercial activities flourished in Constantinople and other major cities throughout the empire. Craftsmen organized into professional guilds produced goods for both local consumption and export markets. These guilds, regulated by imperial authorities, maintained quality standards while providing social services for their members and generating tax revenues for the government. The famous Book of the Eparch, dating from the 10th century, provides detailed regulations for various crafts and trades in Constantinople. This document reveals the sophistication of Byzantine commercial organization and the government's detailed involvement in economic activities. Regulations covered everything from bread baking to silk weaving, ensuring quality while preventing unfair competition. Banking and financial services developed to support the empire's extensive commercial activities. Italian merchants, particularly from Venice, Genoa, and Pisa, established trading posts in Constantinople and other Byzantine cities. These foreign merchants often provided financial services including money changing, credit arrangements, and letters of credit that facilitated long-distance trade. The bezant, the empire's gold currency, became one of medieval Europe's most trusted and widely accepted coins. The stability and purity of Byzantine gold coins made them preferred mediums of exchange from Britain to India. This monetary stability reflected the empire's economic strength while facilitating commercial relationships with distant trading partners. Currency debasement during the 11th century marked the beginning of the empire's long-term economic decline. Financial pressures from military campaigns and administrative expenses forced imperial authorities to reduce the gold content of their coins. This debasement undermined confidence in Byzantine currency while reducing the empire's commercial advantages. Trade agreements with foreign powers shaped the empire's commercial relationships and often determined its economic prosperity. The famous Golden Bull of 1082, which granted extensive trading privileges to Venice, marked a crucial turning point in Byzantine commercial policy. While this agreement provided immediate military assistance against Norman attacks, it ultimately gave Venetian merchants dominant positions in imperial markets. The development of Italian maritime republics during the 11th and 12th centuries challenged Byzantine commercial supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean. Venice, Genoa, and Pisa established trading networks that competed directly with Byzantine merchants while gaining preferential treatment from imperial authorities in exchange for military and financial assistance. Taxation systems evolved to maximize revenues from the empire's diverse economic activities while maintaining incentives for productive investment and commercial expansion. Land taxes based on periodic assessments provided the largest single source of imperial revenue. Commercial taxes including customs duties, market fees, and licensing charges generated additional income from trading activities. The Kommerkian, a tax on commercial transactions, was collected at major markets and border crossings throughout the empire. This tax generated substantial revenues while providing imperial authorities with detailed information about commercial activities and trade patterns. The system required extensive record-keeping and professional tax collectors, but proved highly effective when properly administered. Mining operations in various parts of the empire contributed precious metals and other valuable materials to the imperial economy. Silver mines in Asia Minor provided metal for currency, while gold deposits in various regions supplemented the imperial treasury. Iron mining and processing supported both military equipment production and civilian tools and implements. Industrial production included not only luxury goods for export, but also essential products for domestic consumption. Ceramic workshops produced pottery for daily use, while metalworkers created tools, weapons, and household items. Textile production included both luxury silks for wealthy customers and simple woolen cloth for ordinary consumers. The decline of Byzantine economic power during the empire's final centuries reflected multiple factors, including territorial losses, demographic decline, competition from Italian merchants, and the rise of Ottoman commercial networks. However, Constantinople remained an important commercial center, even under Ottoman rule, demonstrating the enduring advantages of its strategic location. Modern economic historians recognize that the Byzantine Empire created one of the medieval world's most sophisticated commercial systems. Its combination of state regulation with private enterprise, local production with international trade, and monetary stability with fiscal flexibility provided a model for economic organization that influenced commercial development throughout Europe and the Mediterranean world. The empire's economic legacy extended far beyond its political boundaries and historical duration. Commercial practices, financial instruments, and trading relationships developed during the Byzantine period continued to shape Mediterranean commerce long after the empire's fall. This economic heritage represents one of Byzantium's most enduring contributions to world civilization, the end of an empire and its lasting impact. As the sun set on May 29, 1453, over the smoking ruins of Constantinople, it marked not just the end of a city or a dynasty, but the conclusion of over 11 centuries of continuous history stretching back to the founding of the Roman Empire. The Byzantine Empire, which had begun as the eastern half of Rome's dominion, had outlasted every contemporary power and witnessed the rise and fall of countless kingdoms, caliphates, and empires. The immediate aftermath of Constantinople's fall sent shockwaves throughout Europe and the Islamic world. In Western Europe, the news was received with a mixture of mourning and relief. Many Christians lamented the loss of the last remnant of the Roman Empire and the conversion of Hagia Sophia into a mosque. Yet others, particularly in Italy, recognized that the influx of Byzantine scholars fleeing Ottoman rule would bring invaluable manuscripts and knowledge to European universities. The migration of Byzantine intellectuals to the West represented one of history's most significant transfers of knowledge and culture. Scholars like Cardinal Bessarion, Gemistos Plethon, and dozens of others brought with them not just manuscripts of classical Greek authors, but centuries of Byzantine commentary and scholarship that had developed around these texts. This scholarly exodus contributed immeasurably to the European Renaissance, providing Western humanists with access to Greek philosophical and scientific works that had been virtually unknown in medieval Western Europe. The Orthodox Christian world faced a different set of challenges with the fall of Constantinople. The ecumenical patriarchate, while allowed to continue under Ottoman rule, could no longer serve as the political and spiritual center of Orthodox Christianity it had been for over a millennium. This vacuum was gradually filled by the Russian Orthodox Church, which began to see Moscow as the Third Rome, the inheritor of the Byzantine legacy. Ivan III of Moscow married Sophia Palaeologina, niece of the last Byzantine emperor, in 1472, symbolically claiming the Byzantine inheritance for the Russian state. The double-headed eagle of Byzantium became the symbol of Russian imperial power, while Russian rulers began styling themselves as tsars, a Slavic adaptation of Caesar. This claim to Byzantine succession would influence Russian foreign policy and cultural identity for centuries to come. The Ottoman Empire, now in possession of one of the world's great cities, began the process of transforming Constantinople into the capital of a Muslim empire. Sultan Mehmed II encouraged immigration from throughout the Ottoman domains, bringing Muslim, Christian, and Jewish settlers to repopulate the city. Within a generation, Constantinople had recovered much of its former prosperity, though now as an Islamic rather than Christian center. The Hagia Sophia, greatest symbol of Byzantine Christianity, was carefully converted into a mosque. Rather than destroying the building's Christian mosaics, the Ottomans covered them with plaster, inadvertently preserving many works of art that might otherwise have been lost. The building continued to serve as a place of worship for nearly 5 centuries, demonstrating the enduring power of Byzantine architectural achievement. The preservation of Byzantine administrative and legal traditions under Ottoman rule showed the practical value of imperial institutions that had evolved over centuries of experience. Ottoman administrators adopted many Byzantine practices for governing multi-ethnic populations, while elements of Byzantine law influenced the development of Ottoman legal codes. The millet system, which granted autonomy to religious communities, bore clear resemblances to Byzantine administrative practices. In Western Europe, the fall of Constantinople provided final confirmation that the medieval period had ended. The empire that had preserved classical learning and maintained continuous links with the ancient world was gone, forcing European intellectuals to find new ways of connecting with their classical heritage. This need contributed to the scholarly movement we now call Renaissance humanism. The study of Greek language and literature expanded dramatically in Western universities as refugee Byzantine scholars established themselves in new homes. The University of Florence, the Sorbonne in Paris, and Oxford in England all benefited from the arrival of men who had been trained in the scholarly traditions of Constantinople. Their students carried this knowledge throughout Europe, creating a new generation of Western intellectuals familiar with Greek philosophical and scientific traditions. The printing press, invented shortly before Constantinople's fall, enabled the rapid dissemination of Greek texts that Byzantine scholars brought to the West. Aldus Manutius in Venice and other early printers published editions of Homer, Plato, Aristotle, and other classical authors that made Greek literature available to European readers for the first time in centuries. This technological innovation multiplied the impact of the Byzantine scholarly diaspora. The artistic influence of Byzantine refugees extended beyond manuscript preservation to include painting, architecture, and decorative arts. Italian Renaissance artists studied Byzantine techniques and incorporated Eastern artistic traditions into their own work. The use of gold backgrounds, the treatment of religious subjects, and various technical innovations all show Byzantine influence on Renaissance art. The theological and spiritual traditions of Byzantine Christianity continued to develop in the Orthodox churches of Eastern Europe, the Balkans, and Russia. The hesychast tradition of mystical prayer, the theological emphasis on theosis or deification, and the liturgical practices developed in Byzantine churches all remained central to Orthodox Christian identity. These spiritual traditions provided continuity with the Byzantine past while adapting to new political circumstances. The memory of Byzantium lived on in European consciousness through literature, art, and historical writing. Edward Gibbon's monumental Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire shaped Western perceptions of Byzantine history for centuries. Though often in ways that undervalued Byzantine achievements, later historians gradually developed more nuanced understandings of Byzantine civilization's complexity and significance. The 19th century Greek independence movement drew inspiration from the Byzantine past, while seeking to recreate a Greek state in territories that had once been part of the empire. The great idea of restoring Greek control over Constantinople and Asia Minor explicitly referenced Byzantine precedents, though political realities made such ambitions impossible to achieve. Modern scholarship has revealed the full extent of Byzantine contributions to world civilization. The preservation of classical learning, the development of Orthodox Christianity, the creation of distinctive artistic and architectural traditions, and the evolution of sophisticated governmental and legal systems all represent lasting achievements that transcended the empire's political collapse. The influence of Byzantine legal traditions extended far beyond the Orthodox world, to shape legal development throughout Europe. The Corpus Juris Civilis remained the foundation of European legal education well into the modern period, while specific Byzantine legal innovations influenced the development of international law, commercial law, and human rights concepts. Contemporary interest in Byzantine history reflects recognition that this empire played crucial roles in preserving classical heritage, developing Christian theology and spirituality, creating artistic masterpieces, and maintaining cultural continuity between ancient and modern civilizations. The empire's location at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa made it a natural meeting place for different cultures and traditions. The technological and scientific knowledge preserved in Byzantine libraries contributed to developments in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and engineering that influenced both Islamic and Western European intellectual development. Byzantine scholars served as crucial links in the chain of knowledge transmission that connected ancient Greek science with medieval Islamic scholarship and ultimately with Renaissance European learning. Perhaps most importantly, the Byzantine Empire demonstrated that political institutions could adapt and survive over extraordinarily long periods through flexibility, cultural sophistication, and administrative competence. The empire's ability to maintain continuity while adapting to changing circumstances provides lessons that remain relevant to contemporary political and social challenges. As we conclude this journey through 11 centuries of Byzantine history, we can appreciate that this empire was far more than simply the eastern remnant of Rome. It was a unique civilization that combined the best elements of classical antiquity with Christian spirituality and administrative innovation. Its legacy continues to influence art, law, religion, and culture throughout the world, ensuring that the light of Byzantium will never be completely extinguished. The empire that began with Constantine's dream of a new Rome and ended with Constantine XI's heroic death on the walls of Constantinople represents one of history's most remarkable achievements in cultural preservation, artistic creation, and governmental sophistication. In studying Byzantine history, we discover not just the story of one empire, but the broader tale of how human civilizations preserved their most precious achievements while adapting to an ever-changing world.